Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something ancient, sacred and completely off the rails. Think candlelight, marble floors slick with incense smoke, and a line of women waiting patiently, not to receive blessings, but to give them. You've just arrived in Babylon circa 600 BCE, and you're about to learn firsthand why sacred doesn't always mean celibate. Quick heads up. You probably won't survive this, whether from the heat, the gods, or sheer cultural whiplash. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know what city you're in, and what time it is right now. You'll probably remember this one in the morning. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking slowly, barefoot, across the polished stone of a temple courtyard. The air smells of rose oil and smoke. Statues of Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of love, war and everything in between, glare down at you, half smiling, half menacing. It's late. The stars are out, but the city is still humming with sound. Donkeys braying, water flowing through stone channels, and somewhere nearby the rhythmic clap of hands and sandals. You're not here as a tourist. You're here as a participant. See, in Babylon, at least according to some very old and very debated sources, every woman was once required to serve in the temple of Ishtar, not as a candle lighter or hymn singer, but as a sacred prostitute. The term is misleading. This isn't casual or sleazy. It's ritual. It's divine. It's complicated. The rules? You show up, dress modestly. No makeup, no jewellery, and wait in the temple courtyard. When a stranger chooses you, they toss a coin into your lap. You accept, follow them inside, and lie with them once, invoking the name of Ishtar. Only then are you considered purified and free to marry or go about your life. This isn't transactional in the way we think of it now. It's devotion. It's sacrifice. It's your social duty to the goddess and the city. You sit down on a stone bench next to a woman who looks like she's been here all day. She's rubbing sandalwood oil into her arms. Her eyes are tired but resolute. You try to ask her if she believes in all this. She shrugs. Ishtar gives life and takes it. She gave me hips. I give her what she asks. Then she smiles, and you're not sure if it's bitter or proud. Historically, this tale comes to us mostly through Herodotus, the Greek historian who travelled the ancient world collecting gossip and half-truths. He described this custom with his usual flair, noting how Babylonian women must once in their life offer themselves at the temple of Melita, another name for Ishtar. But there's a catch. Modern scholars argue endlessly over whether this was real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated by scandalised tourists with overactive imaginations. Some archaeologists point out the lack of direct Mesopotamian records confirming these rituals. Others say the absence is the result of selective documentation. Ancient scribes weren't exactly writing Yelp reviews of temple life. What we do have are clay tablets referring to Kadishtu women, priestesses linked to both divinity and sexuality, but whether they performed ritual sex or simply served as spiritual advisors is still a foggy debate. Quirky fact time. If you look at Ishtar's symbols, they're wild. She's associated with lions, stars, and the planet Venus. Her temples had towers that doubled as beacons. Some were even decorated with intricate mosaics of erotic scenes. Yes, public art depicting various positions that would probably get your Instagram account banned today. These weren't just there for shock value. They were considered sacred expressions of cosmic union. As you sit there, trying to blend in with the ancient crowd, the sound of flutes rises from the inner temple. A priest steps out, wearing a headdress covered in beads that tinkle like wind chimes. He surveys the courtyard. His eyes land on a young woman near you. She stands, nods, and follows him inside. The woman next to you leans over and whispers, "She'll serve the god tonight, not a man." Apparently, not all sacred acts were heterosexual. Some rituals, especially during Ishtar's high festivals, involved same-sex couplings, group dances, and orgiastic frenzies that blurred all lines: gender, class, identity. The goal wasn't pleasure for its own sake, but ecstasy as transcendence. By losing yourself in the body, you connected with the divine. It's not a coincidence that Ishtar was also a goddess of chaos. Love and war, birth and death, all were under her domain. These temple rituals weren't meant to be safe. They were meant to undo you, to shake off the crust of everyday life and remind you that your body, flawed and fleeting, was also a conduit for the gods. And yeah, sometimes things got out of hand. One Mesopotamian poem speaks of a festival where Men became women, and women became as men, probably referring to cross-dressing priests known as gala. These figures, who may have been transgender in a modern sense, or simply fluid in their ritual roles, played drums, sang laments, and performed intimate rites in Ishtar's name. As the sky lightens ever so slightly, a bell rings from within the temple. The women around you stand, stretch, and begin to gather their cloaks. Some leave quietly, others exchange coins and quiet thanks. You watch as a small girl runs up to her mother and wraps her arms around her, totally unaware of the sacred duty that had just been fulfilled. No one here seems ashamed, exhausted, yes, but there's a calm pride in the way they walk away. In Babylon, sexuality wasn't hidden or shamed. It was celebrated, ritualized, wrapped in divine mystery. You, on the other hand, are still trying to process what just happened. So you walk out into the early morning, dust clinging to your feet, the scent of jasmine still in your hair, wondering if the line between holy and profane was ever really there at all, or if we just drew it later when we got scared of what the gods actually asked. You don't think much can top what you just experienced in Babylon, but then you find yourself sailing down the Nile under a hot Egyptian sun, surrounded by green reeds and the faint hum of cicadas. The river glistens like molten glass, and ahead, the massive temple complex of Karnak looms in the distance. You're here for a festival, something grand and sacred, but no one's told you the most unsettling part yet. Let's just say it involves a lot of ceremonial chanting, and a solo performance by the pharaoh that leaves you both impressed and deeply uncomfortable. See, in ancient Egypt, fertility wasn't just a nice perk, it was national survival. The annual flooding of the Nile brought life to the fields, and without it, the people starved. Crops withered, animals died, and the social order unravelled. So naturally they tied the health of the land to the health of their divine ruler. If the pharaoh was strong, virile, and in good standing with the gods, the Nile would flood. And if he wasn't, well, you hoped he had a backup. During certain ceremonies, like the Festival of Min, a god associated with fertility, lettuce, and very prominent erections, the pharaoh would take on the role of both ruler and cosmic seed-bringer. And yes, we mean that literally. There are old, though fragmented accounts suggesting that the pharaoh would publicly masturbate, often on a boat, sometimes into the Nile itself, as an act of offering. A symbolic union with the river goddess, meant to ensure fertility for the land. The idea being, if you want a generous flood season, you've got to give a little of yourself to the river. You're ushered into the temple courtyard, which is full of carvings of Min, erect and stoic, always holding what looks like a flail in one hand and a very enthusiastic piece of himself in the other. The priests are dressed in bright white linen, heads shaved, eyes lined in kohl. They chant as they pour sacred water onto statues and scatter lotus petals over stone altars. No one's giggling. This isn't funny to them. It's not even awkward. It's vital. And here's the thing. Some scholars think this public act might have been more symbolic than physical. Maybe the texts describing it were metaphorical. Maybe it was a private ritual, exaggerated later. But others argue, with a bit of a shrug, that no, he really did it. That part of the pharaoh's job was to embody divine virility so convincingly that he had to physically plant life into the very source of Egypt's survival. So picture it. The high priest calls for silence. The air stills. The pharaoh steps forward, wearing the crown of Upper Egypt and a golden kilt that glints in the sun. He lifts his hands to the sky, chants the names of the gods, and then, well, you avert your eyes out of respect or maybe second-hand discomfort. It's weird, yes, but also kind of majestic in a totally unrelatable way. The ceremony doesn't end with that act. It continues with the symbolic ploughing of the field, sometimes literally, with oxen dragging a carved wooden plough through a patch of sacred soil near the temple. In other cases, it's represented by rituals involving fertility symbols, grains, statues, and yes, plenty of lettuce. That last one might seem like an odd vegetable to associate with sexuality, but in ancient Egypt, lettuce oozed a white, milky substance when broken. So naturally, you get the idea. Now here's where it gets quirkier. According to some ancient texts and wall carvings, the god Min wasn't just about fertility in general. He was also worshipped by those seeking more, let's say, personal potency. So you'd have pilgrims travelling across Egypt to stand before an enormous statue of an eternally erect deity, asking for strength, virility, or an heir. Talk about a confident request. But not everyone's sure these rituals happened exactly the way they're described. Some Egyptologists argue that the masturbation of the pharaoh was likely a myth, a symbolic concept misunderstood or sensationalized by later Greek or Roman writers. After all, the Egyptians were deeply metaphorical in their language. Sowing seed could just as easily refer to praying, offering, or ceremonial purification. Still, others point to certain hieroglyphic records and temple inscriptions, especially from Heliopolis and Thebes, where gods are depicted literally creating the world through acts of masturbation. The god Atum, for example, is said to have created Shu and Tefnut by pleasuring himself and sneezing them out. Creation myths don't get much stranger or more specific than that. You lean against a carved column, staring up at an image of Min, who appears absolutely unbothered by centuries of human awkwardness. The people around you aren't embarrassed. They sing, they dance, they throw flower garlands into the river. To them, this isn't obscene, it's sacred, life-giving, a celebration of cosmic order through deeply personal acts. You wander closer to the banks of the Nile where offerings float lazily downstream, carved figurines, baskets of grain, jars of perfumed oil. In the crowd, you spot a young couple pressing their foreheads together in prayer, their hands resting on a small fertility idol. The woman touches her stomach. The man nods solemnly. They've likely travelled for days to be here, hoping the god, or the pharaoh's performance, will bring them a child. And here's a twist. Some temples had what we'd now call fertility booths, small private chambers where couples could consummate their union under the watchful eye of the gods. It wasn't just the pharaoh making offerings. The people got involved too. The sacred and the sexual blurred until you couldn't tell where ritual ended and desire began. As night falls, the festivities fade into soft music and torchlight. The Nile flows steadily, dark and mysterious. You've seen things today you didn't expect, maybe didn't want to, but somehow it all fits. In a world where survival depended on rhythms beyond human control, maybe handing power to the gods through intimate rituals felt like the only way to keep the chaos at bay. You sit on a worn stone near the water, the scent of myrrh still in the air, and wonder what kind of world we built when we stopped believing that ecstasy could open the floodgates of heaven. You barely have time to catch your breath before you're standing in a place where restraint and savagery share the same bed, ancient Sparta. You've heard the stories, the warrior culture, the relentless training, the survival of the fittest mindset that started in childhood and never let up. But what no one warned you about is what happens behind the iron discipline. The intimate rituals baked into the brutal machine. Tonight, you're not just here to learn how to fight. You're here to understand how Spartan boys became Spartan men, and it has a lot less to do with swords than you might think. The agog, the infamous Spartan education system, is already terrifying on paper. Imagine being taken from your home at age 7, tossed into a barracks with dozens of other boys and told, "Okay, forget love, forget comfort. From now on, your entire purpose is to become a weapon. You sleep on reed mats, eat meagre rations and endure regular beatings, not as punishment but as training. And during all that, there's another layer of expectation. You'll be assigned an older male mentor, a warrior who will teach you everything." This relationship, known as pederasty, was institutionalized and encouraged. But in Sparta, it wasn't just about mentorship. It often included physical intimacy. In fact, it was expected. The older warrior, or Erastes, would bond with his Eromenos, the boy, through shared pain, discipline, and yes, sexual connection. The logic. That deep emotional ties between warriors created unbreakable battlefield loyalty. If you loved the man next to you, you'd never let him fall. You watch as a new group of boys lines up for inspection. They look barely old enough to tie their sandals, and yet they've already had the softness kicked out of them. Their mentors stand nearby, men in their 20s dressed in red cloaks, eyes sharp as blades. One of them catches your gaze and nods, like he knows you're figuring out what no one talks about outside of Sparta's walls. There's a sense of pride in these relationships, not shame. The boys are not passive victims, they're active participants in a rite of passage, a ritual meant to bind them to their city, to their brothers, and to their own emerging identity. The older men, for their part, are expected to be role models in every sense. Brave, honourable and generous. Abuse is not tolerated. This isn't about dominance, it's about transformation. But here's where things get debated. Some modern historians argue that Spartan pederasty was mostly symbolic, maybe emotional, but not always physical. Others point to writings by Xenophon and Plutarch, who are quite clear that these relationships had sexual elements. The truth probably lies somewhere in the murky in-between. Not universal, but widespread. Not necessarily exploitative, but certainly complex. And while we're on the topic of complexity, did you know that in Sparta women were unusually empowered for their time? They owned land, trained in athletics, and were expected to be as fierce in their own way as the men. Marriage here wasn't about romance, it was about producing strong children. And in some accounts, brides were shaved, bald, and dressed in men's clothes on their wedding night, supposedly to ease the transition for husbands who had spent their formative years in male-dominated environments. Yeah, that's a detail that tends to get left out of the standard textbooks. You walk through the mess hall where warriors eat in silence. The boys glance at you warily, each one seated next to his mentor. The air smells of boiled barley and sweat. There's no laughter, no idle chatter, just the rhythmic scrape of spoons on wooden bowls. Later, when the torches dim and the barracks grow quiet, you hear soft murmurs, maybe whispered encouragements, maybe something else entirely. The emotional closeness is undeniable. Whether or not every pair is intimate in the sexual sense, the love is real. Love in Sparta just comes with scars. Here's a fringe fact to chew on. There were secret Spartan festivals like the Hyacinthia, where men would dress in women's clothing and sing lamentations for a lost boy lover of the god Apollo. These celebrations were filled with performances, poetry and communal grief. But they also served as reminders that even in the most hardened cultures, tenderness found a way to survive. Not surprisingly, modern scholars still fight over how to frame all this. Was it ritualized grooming? Was it a sacred bond? Was it both? It's easy to apply modern morality to ancient systems, but it rarely sticks cleanly. What's clear is that for the Spartans, sexuality was never just about pleasure. It was about loyalty, hierarchy, and forging the unshakable will to die for your city and your lover. You step out into the cool night air, stars scattered like broken pottery across the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blows, signalling the start of another round of night drills. The boys groan and stretch, their bodies marked with fresh bruises and older scars. You wonder how many of them will live long enough to marry. You wonder how many of them even want to. You pass a statue of Apollo carved from marble so white it seems to glow. At his feet are offerings, sprigs of olive, polished stones, tiny bronze spears. Someone's left a folded scrap of cloth, likely part of a red cloak, perhaps from a boy who didn't return. You don't know if it was left by a mentor, a comrade, or a secret love. Maybe all three. By now you're starting to realise that sex in the ancient world wasn't just about bodies. It was about ritual, about magic, about creating bonds so strong that they could carry you through war, death, or even the silence of a barracks at midnight. Here in Sparta, where men are made through pain and pressure, intimacy isn't just allowed, it's weaponized. And you, a stranger passing through, feel like you've just glimpsed a truth you weren't meant to see. It's heavy, it's strange, but it's real. You've barely scrubbed the Spartan dust from your skin when the next place pulls you in like a heady breeze. Lush hills, ivy-draped stone, and music that starts as a whisper and ends in a full-body possession. Welcome to ancient Greece again, but this time it's not the battlefield, it's the wine-drenched wilderness. You're deep in the throes of the Dionysian mysteries, and honestly you're not entirely sure where the line between ritual and rave begins. This is Bacchanalia, and if you thought you were going to watch from the sidelines, think again. You're handed a goblet before you even finish blinking. It's clay, stained with the remains of wine that's far stronger than it looks. Around you, women sway, crowned with grapevines and humming half-songs to gods whose names blur into the smoke. Someone presses a tambourine into your hand, someone else tugs at your sleeve. You're being led into the woods, deeper and deeper into something that is definitely religious, but also definitely sensual. The Dionysian rites are famous, or infamous, for their wild abandon. They were meant to shatter boundaries, between the living and the dead, between self and God, between man and beast. The Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, led these rites, often disappearing into the hills for nights of ecstatic dance, music and, well, other activities. Picture a drumbeat that pulls at your ribs. Picture limbs lit by moonlight. Picture a mask slipping, and underneath it not a person but a god. You're not hallucinating, at least not yet. The wine might have herbs mixed in. The smoke might not be entirely from firewood. You feel yourself dissolving into the crowd. There's laughter and shouting, and beneath it all a rhythmic chant that vibrates up through the ground. A maenad wraps an arm around your shoulder. Her eyes are wild, she grins. "He comes," she says, and for a moment you forget she means Dionysus and not something else. Now these weren't just drunken parties. They were part of the mystery religions, secretive cults that promised communion with the divine through personal transformation. The Bacchic rites were both performance and prayer. Participants wore masks, played roles, and surrendered to emotional and physical extremes. Dancing led to frenzy. Frenzy led to union. Union led to rebirth. And yes, sex was part of it. Not in the orgy on command kind of way, but as an expression of ecstasy. To become divine, you had to let go of yourself completely. That meant tears, shouting, sexual release, and sometimes literal madness. One moment, you're embracing a stranger in the shadows. The next, you're howling into the trees, convinced you're part of the god's procession. Here's a bizarre detail. In some legends, the Maenads didn't just channel divine energy, they tore things apart. Like, physically. There's a story of Pentheus, a young king who tries to spy on one of the rituals, and the Maenads, in their frenzy, mistake him for a lion and rip him to pieces. His own mother is among them. Yeah, that's the vibe we're working with here. It's not just the women. Men also joined the rites, some dressed as women, others in fawn skins and ivy crowns. There were ritual processions where giant phalluses were paraded through the streets, meant to symbolise fertility and Dionysus's ever-present, ever-pulsing power. You might find yourself part of one of these, carrying a sculpture you can't even describe without breaking eye contact. Scholars are still baffled by how these rites functioned in Greek society. On one hand, they were sanctioned, respected even. On the other, they were suppressed, especially in later Roman times when the state feared their chaotic energy. A famous decree in 1860 BCE tried to shut down the Bacchanalia altogether, citing immoral behaviour and political sedition. But like most things involving mystery and pleasure, the rites didn't die easily. They just went underground. You stumble into a clearing now where a fire blazes and people dance in a circle. Their shadows stretch impossibly long, flickering like ghosts. Someone sings a hymn in a language older than Greek. Someone else is crying, face tilted toward the stars. You find yourself seated beside a man with silver paint on his chest. He offers you a fig and tells you he saw Dionysus in the fire, wearing a crown of snakes. Whether he's speaking metaphorically or just high on henbane, you don't ask. One particularly strange fragment of Bacchic myth says that Dionysus was born twice, once from his mortal mother, and again from the thigh of Zeus after she was incinerated. Yeah, the gods play fast and loose with biology, but this theme of death and rebirth, of being broken down and built back up, is at the core of the ritual. That's why people come here, not for pleasure exactly, but for destruction. They want to be undone. You spot a small altar at the edge of the firelight piled with grapes, animal bones, and strangely enough hair. Offerings to the god. A priest, if you can call him that, moves through the crowd, sprinkling wine on the ground and muttering blessings. He's naked, but for a leopard skin sash and a carved wooden staff, topped with pine cones and ivy. A thyrsus, Dionysus's favourite accessory. You wonder if he was a farmer yesterday, or a nobleman. Here, everyone is anonymous. Roles fall away. What's left is raw humanity, twitching in the god's hands like a puppet. It's easy to scoff now, call it an excuse to get wild, get laid, get weird. But you've seen something deeper here. Something that hints at why these rituals survived for so long. They gave people an outlet, a way to experience ecstasy without shame, to dissolve into something bigger than themselves. In a world where most of life was toil and structure, the Bacchanalia said, scream, laugh, dance until your feet bleed, touch someone's skin and call it prayer. As dawn creeps in, the forest is littered with garlands, overturned goblets, and sleeping bodies. The fire is just embers now, and the music has faded into the rustling of leaves. You're not sure what you did last night. or who you became, but you're also not sure it matters. That's the point. You rise slowly, dizzy, blinking at the soft pink sky. Somewhere, a lyre strums a lazy tune. Someone sings of wine, madness, and love. You don't remember the words, but you hum along anyway, and feel the god still smiling in your bones. You're back in Rome now, and before you ask, yes, the parties are happening. The wine is flowing, the cushions are plush, and the ceilings are painted with gods who look like they're halfway through something very personal. You're standing in the atrium of a patrician's villa, wearing a borrowed toga that feels way too breezy in all the wrong places. Someone hands you a cup of Falernian wine, and someone else whispers, "Welcome to the orgy." But here's the twist. It's not what you think. You probably expected orgies in Rome to be wild, unrestrained, maybe even fun in that shadowy, morally confusing kind of way. But what you walk into feels bureaucratic, like an office party with better furniture and less small talk. There's definitely sex, but it's all very performative. An audience of senators and merchants watching like they're at the theatre, sipping diluted wine and making commentary under their breath. You're seated on a triclinium, those angled couches where eating, drinking and lounging all bleed into each other, and you start to notice something. The actual energy in the room is off, detached, curated, more power play than passion. Here's how it works. The Roman elite didn't just throw orgies for pleasure, they used them to showcase dominance. Hosting a wild evening was a kind of flex, a reminder to guests that you had wealth, influence and access to bodies at your command. Slaves, both male and female, were expected to perform. Guests could participate, or just watch. But everything revolved around control. Who had it? Who lost it? Who never had a chance? You glance over and see a portly senator explaining a law to a half-naked dancer. The dancer nods politely, clearly trained to endure this kind of thing. Nearby, a wealthy woman toys with a feather fan while three young men perform a choreographed scene from Ovid's Metamorphoses, which somehow includes both poetry and suggestive wrestling. It's all deeply rehearsed. Structured chaos. The walls are covered with frescoes that don't even try to be subtle. You pass one depicting Pan chasing a startled-looking nymph, another showing a satyr mid-thrust with a smile that is both horrifying and historically accurate. Romans loved their erotic art, but even the art feels more symbolic than lusty, like they're reminding themselves that they're descended from gods who didn't ask for consent. Quirky fact, Roman dining rooms, especially in upper-class homes, often included phallic decorations, not just for shock, but for protection. The fascinum, a carved penis amulet, was believed to ward off evil, so yes, you could be eating olives under a mosaic of Mercury's genitals and feel totally safe. As you sip your wine, carefully because you have no idea what's in it, someone tries to draw you into a philosophical debate about whether virtue survives in pleasure. You politely decline and instead focus on the central pool, where rose petals float on the water's surface like bloated little symbols of luxury. A man with coal-lined eyes is reciting a poem while reclining against another man's thigh. No one bats an eye. In Rome, bisexuality was practically default, as long as you followed the social rules. A citizen male could sleep with whoever he wanted as long as he was the one doing the dominating. Being on the receiving end, especially as a freeborn man, was a fast track to ridicule and loss of status. And that's the key to understanding Roman orgies. They weren't about mutual pleasure. They were about power. Men dominated, women and enslaved people submitted. Even when everyone looked like they were enjoying themselves, there was always a pecking order carved into the cushions. That's what turns your stomach just a little. Even here in the candlelight and perfume, the politics are more pungent than the incense. Still, it's not all grim. In more private gatherings, especially among artists, philosophers, and the occasional sensual poet, there were softer, more intimate expressions of eroticism. A small circle might gather for poetry readings, slow dances, and a kind of quiet indulgence that didn't involve 20 other people watching. You get a glimpse of that when one guest pulls a lover aside, and they sneak into the garden, giggling like school children. The marble statues might not approve, but you kind of do. There's a scholarly debate that rages on about just how common these orgiastic feasts really were. Were they everyday occurrences among the upper crust, or exaggerated rumours spread by political enemies? After all, most of what we know comes from moralistic accounts written by people who wanted to shame the powerful. or from the graffiti and art left behind, which might reflect fantasy more than fact. It's possible these events were rare, overhyped, or even coded in ways we can't fully decode today. One of the most famous scandals involved Emperor Tiberius, whose private island retreat was allegedly stocked with children trained in obscene acts. Suetonius described it in stomach-turning detail, but modern historians question how much was true and how much was propaganda. Rome loved to build people up and then destroy them with tales of decadence. In that sense, orgy stories were the ancient equivalent of tabloid headlines. You decide to wander away from the crowd for a bit. Past a curtain of gold beads, you find a small alcove lit with oil lamps. A young woman is strumming a lyre, her song soft and wordless. A man listens beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. For a moment, there's no hierarchy, no audience, just two people, wrapped in music and warmth. It's rare and real. You stay a while. By the time you return to the main room, the mood has shifted. People are passed out or slipping away in pairs. The wine has run dry. The floor is sticky with spilled honey cakes and the kind of things you hope never to step on again. A server is collecting empty goblets with a haunted look in his eyes. You give him a nod. He doesn't return it. As you slip out into the cool Roman night, the stars overhead look almost too pure. You've just left a place that claimed to be about pleasure, but felt more like theatre, one where intimacy was staged, status was everything, and no one really got out with their soul intact. You wonder what happens when the wine stops flowing. You wonder how many of them ever feel anything real at all. By the time you wash Rome from your skin and head out to the island of Cyprus, you're half expecting another wine-fueled masquerade. But Paphos greets you differently. The air is lighter here, soft with salt and orange blossom. People smile more freely, their robes looser, their laughter more musical. You walk along the white stone path toward the Temple of Aphrodite, unsure of what you're walking into, but certain it won't involve senators quoting poetry at half-naked dances. It feels more sacred here, still sensual, but quiet, softer, and as you're about to learn, very strange. The Temple of Aphrodite at Paphos is one of the oldest sanctuaries on the island, its walls thick with stories, some whispered, some carved into marble. The statue of the goddess inside isn't a graceful nude figure like you'd expect from classical art. It's a conical black stone, smooth and polished from centuries of hands. There's something ancient about it, older than Greece, older maybe than writing itself. Here, you don't just worship Aphrodite, you merge with her. You've heard of sacred prostitution. Before, Babylon had its version, but Cyprus gives it its own spin. The stories say that women, in honour of Aphrodite, would offer themselves to strangers at the temple as an act of devotion, not because they were coerced, not because they were paid, but because by surrendering their bodies to chance they enacted the will of the goddess, love unbound, unjudged and divinely inspired. You're sceptical, of course. It sounds a little too poetic for real life. But then you walk into the temple courtyard and see the line of women sitting quietly on smooth benches, draped in pale linen. Some are young, others older. No makeup, no jewellery. Each one with a small clay token in her palm, stamped with the image of a dove, Aphrodite's bird. There's no flirtation, no advertising. They just wait. A man approaches one of them, kneels, places a coin at her feet. She nods. They rise together and walk into a shadowed room beyond the courtyard. No words, just that quiet exchange of presence and permission. It's less erotic than you expect and somehow more intimate. You wonder if this is how the ancient Cypriots saw love, not as something chaste or conquered, but as something that arrives, takes what it needs, and disappears before dawn. The idea of sacred prostitution has haunted historians for centuries. Herodotus described it in reverent, if slightly scandalized terms. Later writers echoed him, spinning tales of entire cities where every woman was once required to lie with a stranger in honour of the goddess. But modern scholars aren't so sure. There's little archaeological evidence to support widespread temple sex. Some suggest the stories were metaphorical, others argue they were misunderstandings of local customs. Maybe Aphrodite's worship involved symbolic unions, not literal ones. Or maybe the truth lies somewhere between legend and ash. Still, Cyprus leans into the myth. The locals tell you stories of love festivals during the full moon, when the temple was lit with oil lamps, and the night echoed with lyre music and soft laughter. Couples, married or not, were encouraged to sleep together on sacred ground, letting their love be witnessed by the goddess. No one kept score. No one passed judgment. That was Aphrodite's rule. Love is holy, no matter how brief or inconvenient. You follow a side path that leads to a quiet garden behind the temple. There, carved into a rock wall, is a frieze of 3 figures entwined. Not in lust, but in surrender. Their faces are tilted to the sky, eyes closed, hands open. It's not about possession, it's about offering. Beneath the carving is an inscription, faded but readable. To give is to become divine. A young priestess walks past you, carrying a basket of figs and myrrh. She glances at you and says, almost offhandedly, she doesn't want worship, she wants honesty. Then she disappears around the corner, leaving you alone with the strange weight of that sentence. You sit beneath a fig tree and think about Aphrodite, not the Venus on seashells we plaster across art books, but this older, darker, more generous version. She's not all softness, she's not all seduction, she's a force of nature, pulling lovers together and ripping them apart. Her power doesn't ask for comfort, it demands openness. You start to understand why people would give their bodies in her name, not out of duty but as an act of trust, an offering not to the gods but to the ache of being human. Here's a curious detail. Cyprus hosted an annual festival known as the Aphrodisia, where the statue of the goddess would be ritually washed in seawater, perfumed, and carried through the streets in a floral procession. Women danced barefoot through the city, singing hymns and inviting passers-by to join. Some say these festivals ended in orgiastic celebration. Others say they ended with quiet couples staring at the stars. Either way, the line between love and worship dissolved by the end of the night. You explore the temple grounds until dusk, when the last of the sun turns the white stone golden. A soft breeze carries the smell of incense and ocean. In the distance, the sea murmurs like a lover in sleep. As the stars begin to bloom overhead, the women in the courtyard light small clay lamps and place them beside their feet. One by one, they are chosen, or not. No one seems to mind either outcome. You wonder what it means to be chosen. You wonder what it means to offer yourself without guarantee. Maybe that's the core of all ancient rituals, to let go of certainty and become something fragile in front of something vast. As you leave the temple, a man offers you a dove-shaped token. Just in case, he says with a smile. You pocket it, not sure what to do with it, but unwilling to let it go. Later that night, lying on a stone bench beneath the stars, you swear you hear footsteps, or wings, or laughter on the wind. You hold the token tight, and for a moment you don't feel alone. The next place you land is heavy with incense and soft bells. You're in ancient India now, somewhere along the banks of the Ganges, walking barefoot through a forested path toward a structure that's half temple, half ashram. It's early morning, and the air is cool and sweet with sandalwood smoke. People pass you with hands folded in namaste, their eyes gentle but knowing, as if they're aware you've arrived at the place where things get intimate in an entirely different dimension. You're here to witness a tantric initiation, and it's nothing like what pop culture led you to believe. You've probably heard the term tantra tossed around, usually by wellness influencers who treat it like yoga's naughty cousin. But the original practice is ancient, complex, and way deeper than scented candles and extended eye contact. In its truest form, Tantra is about using the body as a vehicle to transcend the body. And yes, sometimes that involves sex, but it's not about climax. It's about channeling energy, invoking deities, and turning pleasure into a bridge between the physical and the divine. You arrive at the outer sanctum of the temple, greeted by a guru whose forehead is marked with 3 horizontal ash lines. He looks like he hasn't slept in a decade, but somehow also radiates serene voltage. He speaks softly and leads you to a shaded platform draped in red cloth. Candles flicker in niches, casting shadows on carved stone deities, Shiva, Kali, Parvati, all mid-dance, mid-embrace, mid-everything. The couple already seated at the centre of the platform wears simple robes, eyes closed in meditation. You notice the air between them shimmer slightly, like heat rising from a flame. They're not touching yet, but it feels like they're already one being. The guru begins to chant low and rhythmic, and soon the entire temple vibrates with sound. Not noise, but resonance. You feel it in your chest, your knees, your spine. Every syllable is like a tuning fork against your soul. This is where it gets wild. in the quietest possible way. The couple opens their eyes and begins the ritual. Slow movements, hand gestures called mudras, synchronized breathing. This isn't about seduction. It's a form of meditation, an active, deliberate act of sacred union. The woman is the embodiment of Shakti, divine feminine energy. The man becomes Shiva, pure consciousness. Their goal is not orgasm but awakening, a journey through energy centres known as chakras, aiming for full spiritual liberation. Here's your quirky fact of the night. In some tantric sects, particularly the left-hand path known as Vamachara, practitioners would intentionally break social taboos during rituals to achieve transcendence. That meant sex, yes, but also meat-eating, alcohol and other forbidden acts. The idea was that by confronting and integrating the impure, you overcame duality. Enlightenment, but make it spicy. You're probably thinking, but did this really happen, or is it more philosophical than physical? Great question, and one scholars are still debating. Some texts, like the Kulanava Tantra, are explicitly clear about sexual rights being part of the path. Others are metaphorical, using the language of union to describe meditative states. Western interpretations have often been reductionist, boiling Tantra down to tantric sex, when in truth that's just one tiny leaf on a very gnarly tree. You sit, cross-legged as the ritual intensifies. The couple now faces each other, knees touching, breathing in sync. They chant softly, so ham, meaning I am that. Hands move to hearts, eyes lock. There is stillness, and then a slow, deliberate merging. It's not explicit, it's not voyeuristic, it's devotional. You feel intrusive for even witnessing it, but you also can't look away. It's like watching a candle become its own flame. One debated point in tantric history is whether these rites were practiced widely or only among elite spiritual circles. Some evidence suggests that temples like those in Khajuraho or Konarak, famous for their erotic sculptures, were built as visual metaphors for Tantra's sacred union. Others argue that those carvings had nothing to do with Tantra, and everything to do with celebrating human life in all its messy glory. Either way, the link between sexuality and the sacred was never far from reach in ancient Indian thought. You get up and quietly follow the guru into an inner chamber, where walls are painted with mandalas and diagrams of the human body's energy flow. He shows you a scroll, delicate as silk, covered in Sanskrit. It maps out how the sexual act, performed with intention and devotion, opens gateways within the self. The body is a temple, he says, but most people only visit the door. Outside, the temple is beginning to stir. Monks sweep the floors. Birds call from mango trees. But inside, you still feel that slow pulse of energy vibrating through everything. You pass another pair of initiates beginning their ritual, and one smiles at you. Not flirtatiously, but with a kind of radiant compassion, as if to say, don't worry, you'll get it someday. As you leave the temple grounds, the sun is rising over the river. The mist is lifting and the light turns everything gold. You understand now that this wasn't a sex ritual in the way your mind first imagined. It was more like a slow unfolding of consciousness, with sex as the key, not the treasure. The path back is lined with jasmine and the distant echoes of conch shells. You feel oddly light, like your thoughts have been cleaned out by something you couldn't quite name. Maybe love, maybe divinity, maybe just the realization that not all pleasure is indulgent, and not all surrender is weakness. You take one last look at the temple and realize they weren't chasing desire, they were chasing truth. And the body, strange and holy, was the doorway. You open your eyes in a place that feels more dream than memory. Jungle thick with vines, air humming with insects, and pyramids that rise like frozen fire from the forest floor. You're in the heart of ancient Mesoamerica now, in a Mayan city where stone steps bleed history, and the calendar never quite stops ticking. There's something sharp in the silence here, something alive beneath the moss. You're not just visiting a temple, you're stepping into a union. Not between people, but between humans and gods. And it's going to hurt. The Maya, with their obsession over cycles and sacrifice, saw the world as a delicate exchange. Every sunrise required payment. Every harvest was a gift given back. And the gods, they were demanding but fair. If you gave them blood, they gave you rain. If you offered pain, they offered prophecy. so it makes a twisted kind of sense that sex, sacrifice and ritual would wind themselves together in this tight cosmic knot. You're taken to a ceremonial platform at the edge of a dense forest clearing. The ground is swept clean, decorated with flower petals and strange clay figurines, each one depicting a couple entwined or a deity merging with a mortal. The priest who greets you wears a jaguar pelt and a necklace made from what you really hope are animal bones. He speaks slowly, as if reciting lines he's said 1,000 times. Tonight, he says, the gods are hungry, but they want more than blood. You don't know what that means yet, but you're about to find out. The ritual you're witnessing is part of a fertility rite, one tied to the worship of Ix-Chel, goddess of love, fertility, midwifery, and destruction. She's no soft Venus. She's often shown with serpents in her hair and claws for hands, straddling both life and death like a queen who's seen some things. The ritual begins with couples, or, in this case, specially chosen women, gathered before a sacred tree. They chant together, sway in rhythmic unison, and then, without much warning, draw small obsidian blades from their belts and begin the act of bloodletting. Now, this isn't metaphor. You watch as they carefully pierce their tongues, earlobes, and yes, even more intimate areas. The blood is caught in bark paper strips and burned as offerings. The smoke rises in long tendrils, carrying their pain and their intention into the sky. They're not screaming. They're not hesitating. This is power, sharpened by purpose. Among the Maya, sexuality wasn't just about pleasure or procreation. It was a conduit, a tool for unlocking other realms. Ritual sex, particularly during major festivals or calendar transitions, was seen as a way to balance cosmic energies. Sometimes it was symbolic, other times deeply physical. There are records, fragments really, of high-ranking priestesses engaging in ceremonial intercourse with chosen warriors to ensure divine favour. These weren't orgies, these were contracts, a merging of bodies to stabilise the world. And then there's the fringe stuff. You're shown a series of pottery shards and stone carvings, moshi style, though the Maya shared similar motifs, that show couples engaging in acts you didn't think would be preserved in museum-quality clay. But there they are, some explicit, some bizarre, a few that make you blink and tilt your head like, wait, is that? But none of it is hidden, none of it is shameful. The Maya celebrated eroticism as part of life's endless cycle. Birth, sex, death, rebirth, repeat until the sun gets tired. One particularly debated text speaks of a sacred union between a royal woman and a man chosen by divination. They would isolate themselves in a cave, yes, a literal cave, for 9 nights, reenacting the birth of the world through both spoken prayer and carnal connection. The cave, symbolic of the womb and the underworld, added another layer. You weren't just mating. You were recreating existence. Some scholars roll their eyes at this, calling it myth. Others argue that the frequency of cave shrines with clear signs of ritual activity suggests it wasn't all symbolic. As the night deepens, drums begin to beat. Slow, low, the kind of rhythm that makes your bones vibrate. Dancers take the stage, painted in red and black, moving with jaguar grace. The priest returns, holding a sculpture of Ix-Chel mid-birth, her face fierce, not serene. He places it on the altar and chants a prayer asking for rain, fertility, and strength in childbirth. Then he pours liquid over the stone, chocolate mixed with blood, and invites the women to touch it, smearing it across their foreheads and chests. You're brought into the circle now, not to participate, thank the gods, but to witness. One of the women, still bleeding lightly from her ritual wounds, steps forward and kneels before the statue. A man joins her, a young warrior, painted with blue swirls and jaguar spots. They embrace gently, not lasciviously. There is a hush. Then, under the firelight and the heavy beat of the drums, they begin the sacred act. It is not performed, it is not hidden. It simply is, watched in respectful silence, woven into the chant. Here's the strange thing. It doesn't feel voyeuristic. It feels elemental, like watching wind erode stone, or fire consume leaves. The ceremony continues with more chants, more blood, more ritual. You lose track of time, of rules. of what part of the night this is supposed to be. When the act ends, the couple is wrapped in woven cloth and carried away, not as outcasts, but as offerings. They'll spend the next few days in seclusion, treated as semi-divine figures, nourished with honey and maize. When they return, they'll be different. Not married exactly, but bonded, altered, marked as the ones who opened a path between worlds. You sit quietly at the edge of the clearing, heart pounding in rhythm with the drums. Smoke rises, stars blink like gods watching through a screen of jungle. The air tastes of earth and ash. It's easy to dismiss these rites as primitive, as brutal. But in this moment you realise something. They weren't trying to shock. They were trying to balance, to hold the fragile tension between body and cosmos, between hunger and holiness. As dawn breaks, the temple steps shimmer with dew, and the women begin washing away the blood in a sacred pool. Laughter rises like birdsong, soft, tentative. It's over for now. You walk away wondering what we lost when we stopped believing that our bodies were part of the story. Not just vessels, but instruments, maybe even prayers. You don't think anything can surprise you at this point. After all, you've just watched blood turned into incense and sex turned into a cosmic reset button. But then you find yourself in Japan, standing in the shadow of Mount Fuji, watching a man hoist a 10-foot wooden penis onto his shoulder like it's a sacred relic, which, in this case, it absolutely is. Welcome to the Shinto fertility festivals, where subtlety goes to die and ancient reverence wears a rather cheeky smile. The festival is called Kanamara Matsuri, which loosely translates to Festival of the Steel Phallus. You're in the town of Kawasaki in early spring, and the streets are packed with vendors, celebrants, and at least 3 portable shrines shaped like enormous penises. One bright pink, one black lacquer, one polished to a divine gleam. There are penis lollipops, penis keychains, and, because why not, tiny penis hats. Children run around giggling. Elderly grandmothers laugh and wave fans shaped like, well, you get it. You can't decide if you've stumbled into a bachelor party thrown by the gods or an unusually friendly fertility rite. Turns out, it's both. But this isn't some modern novelty or tourist gimmick. The origins of the festival stretch back to the Edo period, and they're a mix of practical spirituality and very vivid symbolism. According to legend, a young woman was cursed with a demon who took up residence inside her vagina. Not metaphorically, literally. Every time she tried to consummate a marriage, the demon bit her suitor's penis clean off. Desperate for a solution, she sought help from a blacksmith who forged an iron phallus to confront the demon head-on. It worked. The demon broke its teeth, fled, and the woman was freed. The iron penis? That became a relic, worshipped, celebrated, carried through the streets once a year in glorious, gleaming defiance. You're handed a sack cup shaped like a tiny phallus and invited to join a circle of celebrants. A Shinto priestess in traditional white robes smiles and hands out sprigs of sakaki, sacred evergreens used in rituals. You watch as she places offerings at the base of the iron phallus, candies, rice, flowers, and even condoms. Yes, actual condoms. This festival doesn't shy away from modern connections. In fact, part of the celebration now raises awareness for HIV prevention and sexual health. Somehow this mix of ancient belief and contemporary cause blends seamlessly under the bright paper lanterns. Shinto, unlike many religious traditions, doesn't view sexuality as impure. The human body, in all its functions and fluids, is considered natural and sacred. Procreation is divine. Genitals are not hidden in shame, but honoured as the source of life. In many rural areas, you'll find shrines dedicated entirely to fertility, sometimes with statues so explicit they'd make a Roman fresco blush. One of the most famous is the Tagata Shrine, where the annual Honensai festival celebrates harvest and virility, with a ceremonial parade of a 600-pound wooden phallus through the fields. The crowd chants and claps as the procession begins. The giant penis shrine is hoisted onto a platform and carried through the streets by men in festival robes. Every so often they spin it, causing a cheer to erupt as if they've just scored. A divine touchdown. Children throw petals, couples press their foreheads together, women trying to conceive touch the base of the shrine and whisper prayers. It's raucous, sure, but underneath the humour is a real, grounded hope. People come here not just to laugh, but to wish, fervently, sometimes desperately, for children, for health, for answers. You sit beneath a cherry tree, the blossoms falling like pink snow, and sip more sake. A man next to you, clearly a local, says through a translator, "We celebrate what gives life. Not just babies, joy, love, strength." Then he points to the procession and adds, "That's our God's smile." You nod, unsure whether he's being poetic or very literal. Maybe both. Here's a strange historical footnote. During the Edo period, sex work was legal and heavily regulated in Japan, and many of the fertility festivals had ties to these red light districts. The Kaneyama Shrine, central to today's festival, was once a place where sex workers came to pray for protection from disease and for continued health in a trade that was both stigmatized and essential. The link between divine protection and sexual labor wasn't taboo, it was practical. Still, scholars debate the original intent of these festivals. Were they about agriculture, human fertility, a little of both? Some argue that the phallus was always symbolic, tied to growth and abundance. Others believe it was more literal, a community-wide celebration of virility and sensuality. What's clear is that these events survived because they managed to hold reverence and absurdity in the same hand. You can laugh and still mean it. You can cheer and still hope. As the procession winds through the town, people toss coins into donation baskets and bow before the shrine. A group of women in vibrant kimonos sing an old folk song about lovers finding each other in the rice fields. It's off-key and perfect. Somewhere, a child asks loudly why the statue is so big, and his mother answers with a shrug, "So the gods can see it." Everyone laughs. You follow the shrine to its final resting place back at the temple, where it's placed on an altar surrounded by offerings. A final prayer is spoken, and then, just like that, it's over. The crowd disperses. The vendors pack up their cartoonish wares, and you're left standing in the middle of a temple courtyard surrounded by petals, laughter, and a lingering sense that you've just participated in something far deeper than it first appeared. As the sun sets behind the hills, you realise this was no joke. The penis wasn't just a symbol of reproduction, it was a symbol of resilience, of continuity, of life pushing forward, shamelessly and stubbornly like spring through snow. You walk back through the lantern-lit streets, a little tipsy, a little stunned. Your pockets are full of trinkets you're not sure you can explain at airport customs. But your heart is light. You've just watched a culture celebrate the human body without shame and turn a once-feared curse into a parade float with confetti. Not bad for a steel phallus. You're somewhere colder now, much colder. Snow crunches beneath your boots and the wind cuts sharp across your face, carrying the scent of ice, whale oil and seal skin. You're in the Arctic Circle, bundled in furs, trudging toward a low dome-shaped igloo that seems to rise from the snow like a white mirage. The landscape is endless and silent, except for the occasional bark of a sled dog or the hollow whine of wind across ice. The stars feel close enough to pluck from the sky, and tonight you're about to learn what hospitality really means among the Inuit, and how warmth sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms. The door to the igloo is a small low tunnel you have to crawl through. Inside, the space is surprisingly cosy. A seal oil lamp flickers gently on a carved soapstone ledge, casting golden light across the hard-packed snow walls. A pot of stew bubbles quietly. Two figures, your hosts, smile warmly as you enter, gesturing for you to sit beside the fire. You do, gratefully, fingers already thawing. You're offered food, drink, a thick fur to wrap around your shoulders. But then comes the offer that stops your breath in its tracks. If you like, your host says with perfect calm, "You may sleep with my wife tonight. You are far from home. We share warmth here." You stare. He doesn't blink. His wife, sitting beside him, meets your gaze with the same unflinching kindness. There's no pressure in their offer, no awkwardness, no suggestion of anything deviant or strange. This is simply how it's done. You've just been offered the most intimate form of welcome, wife-lending, a practice that has existed in various Arctic communities for centuries. Now, it sounds wild by modern standards, and plenty of early European explorers were scandalized when they encountered it. But context is everything. In traditional Inuit culture, survival in a brutally harsh environment meant valuing generosity, kinship, and communal responsibility above all else. Isolation could be deadly, loneliness could be fatal, so sharing, food, tools, warmth, even companionship, became a sacred duty. Wife-lending wasn't transactional. It was emotional, social, sometimes spiritual. And it wasn't always about sex either. Sometimes it truly was about comfort. A lonely traveller might crave human closeness more than pleasure. And while sexual intimacy was often included in the offer, it came with respect, not ownership. The wife had the final say, and it wasn't unusual for her to decline, politely, without insult. Some anthropologists have framed this as an extreme form of hospitality, while others argue it was a way to forge social bonds between otherwise isolated families. A kind of insurance policy. Share your wife with a traveller today, and one day, when your son is caught in a snowstorm far from home, maybe someone will return the favour. It's not about exploitation, it's about connection. As you eat your stew, salty, rich with seal meat, you try not to stare at your host too hard. They chat with you easily, asking about your journey, your home, your family. Their child plays quietly in the corner, carving a small sled from driftwood. There's nothing performative here, no hint that they're offering you something unusual. It's as casual as offering you an extra blanket. Here's a curious detail. In some Inuit dialects, there are specific words for the relationship between a man and the man who has slept with his wife. It's not derogatory, it's affectionate, like a brother in spirit. That's how ingrained this ritual was. Not something shameful, but something respected. A bond between men, forged through shared trust and mutual care. Of course, not every visitor saw it that way. When missionaries arrived in the Arctic in the 19th and 20th centuries, they were horrified. To them, the practice was sinful, even criminal. Many set out to erase it entirely, preaching monogamy and European morality as if it were survival gear. And in many places, they succeeded. By the mid-20th century, wife-lending had nearly disappeared, driven underground or abandoned entirely. Today, it's more myth than memory, a story elders sometimes whisper, a tradition too tangled with judgment to revive. But here, in the warmth of the igloo, in this imagined moment, it still breathes. And for a second, you see it not as something exotic, but as something deeply human. You decline the offer, gently, not out of offence, but because the moment itself, the trust, the openness, is enough. Your host nods, unfazed, and hands you more stew. The conversation drifts to the stars, to the seals migrating south, to the ice shelf that's been groaning louder this year. Life here is fragile. Every gesture matters. The scholarly debate around wife-lending is ongoing. Some argue it was more rare than reported, exaggerated by explorers hungry for scandal. Others say it was widespread, but so normal that people didn't think to record it in detail. Like asking someone if they wear boots in the snow, it goes without saying. Then there's the anthropological hot potato of whether it was empowering or patriarchal. Did women have full agency? In some cases, yes. In others, maybe not. The truth is, it varied, just like people do. As the night deepens, your hosts unroll sleeping mats and pull furs over their shoulders. The oil lamp burns low, casting soft amber arcs across the curved ceiling. You lie beside them, close enough to feel their warmth but separated by a small wall of carved snow blocks, a courtesy. You hear them breathing, slow and steady. Outside the wind howls, but inside it's calm, peaceful, safe. You're struck by how intimacy, here, doesn't need to be dramatic or carnal to feel sacred. It's in the offering, in the trust, in the shared heat of three. Bodies under one roof in a world made entirely of ice. And as you drift off, you wonder if maybe we've made intimacy too complicated. Maybe it's not about love or sex or romance or rules. Maybe it's just about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and saying, "You're not alone tonight." By the time you thaw out from your Arctic night, the snow has melted under your feet, replaced by soft, dew-kissed grass and hills, dotted with ancient standing stones. The air smells like peat smoke and wildflowers, and the sky glows with the soft grey light of an overcast dusk. You're in Iron Age Britain now, more precisely among the Celts, and tonight you're about to dance through one of their most electric, unrestrained, and spiritually charged celebrations, Beltane, the festival of fire, fertility, and the kind of sex that doesn't ask for your name. The fires haven't been lit yet, but the whole village is humming with anticipation. You can feel it in the way people move, how they glance at one another, the sly little smiles blooming like spring blossoms. Beltane marks the beginning of the fertile season, when the livestock go to pasture, the crops are blessed, and people are, well, enthusiastically encouraged to do what living creatures do in springtime. You're led to a wide open field near the edge of a sacred grove. There, massive bonfires are being stacked, logs, branches, dried brush, all arranged with ritual precision. 2 fires, always 2, creating a narrow corridor between them. Soon the animals will be herded through that corridor to bless them, purify them, and ensure a year of health and abundance. But after the animals pass through, people will too, and that's where things start getting wild. The priestess overseeing the ritual wears a crown of hawthorn blossoms. Her robes are dyed the colour of ripe berries, and she carries a bundle of herbs that smells like smoke and lemon. She welcomes you with a touch to the forehead and a knowing smile, then hands you a garland of rowan branches. Protection, she says, for the heart and the hips. You try not to read too much into it, but you're already blushing. As the sun dips below the horizon, the fires are lit. Huge plumes of orange and gold rise into the sky, sending sparks whirling like fireflies on a mission. The air grows thick with the scent of burning sage and something else, something sweet and resinous, meant to lower your guard and blur the edges of your awareness. Drums start beating, flutes join in. Soon, everyone is moving, weaving around the flames in wide, hypnotic circles. Laughter mingles with song, and you can feel the energy building, not frantic, but pulsing, warm, inevitable. The Celts believed that Beltane was a time when the veil between worlds was thin, not as dangerous as Samhain, their autumn festival of the dead, but just as powerful. It was a liminal moment when humans and spirits mingled freely, when boundaries dissolved and nature took the lead. Fertility rites were central to this, and they weren't subtle. Couples, often strangers, would pair off and disappear into the woods to bless the land in the most literal sense. It wasn't scandalous, it wasn't shameful, it was sacred. You're invited to jump the fire, a symbolic act to purify the self and attract good fortune. You hesitate, then run and leap, the heat licking at your calves, your heart thudding like a drum in your chest. On the other side, you land with a laugh, caught by a stranger's hands. Their eyes meet yours, no words, just a shared understanding. Anything could happen tonight, and anything might. Now, here's the twist. While Beltane is often romanticised as a free-for-all, it wasn't lawless. The rituals had rules, boundaries, and meaning. For example, the Greenwood marriages, temporary unions blessed under the spring moon, were often formed this night, with couples agreeing to a year and a day together, after which they could part ways with no shame. Children born from these unions were considered lucky, even noble. There was no stigma in sacred springtime conception, only celebration. You follow a procession into the woods, led by figures dressed as the May Queen and the Green Man, symbols of feminine and masculine energy, of blooming and seeding, of divine coupling mirrored in every leaf and blossom. Their union, whether symbolic or actual, would seal the ritual, ensuring fertility not just for the people but for the earth itself. In the forest, the mood changes. It becomes softer, slower, wrapped in shadow and song. People pair off and drift into secluded glades. Some stay in groups, dancing under moonlight, sharing mead and kisses and stories. You're not pressured. This isn't about conquest. It's about connection. Temporary, maybe, but powerful. You find yourself sitting beside a woman whose fingers are stained with berry juice. She offers you a sip from her cup and says, "Tonight the gods are watching, but kindly." The scholarly debate about Beltane's sexual rituals has raged for decades. Some argue the rites were more metaphor than flesh, and that Victorian writers exaggerated the licentiousness to scandalise their readers. Others point to consistent patterns in folklore, oral traditions, and medieval Christian complaints that all seem to agree people got it on in the woods, for the gods, for the crops, for the joy of it. Archaeological evidence is scarce. Intimacy doesn't fossilise well, but the ritual symbolism is everywhere, from fertility idols to Beltane songs that make your modern sensibilities raise an eyebrow or two. One particularly charming Beltane tradition was the use of May poles, tall wooden poles planted in the earth, around which people danced, weaving colourful ribbons into intricate patterns. Many scholars, and quite a few snickering modern historians, have pointed out the phallic symbolism, a giant pole rising from the soil, honoured with movement, music, and celebration. Yeah, subtle as a wild boar in a daisy field. As dawn approaches, the fires begin to die down, leaving smouldering ash and circles of glowing embers. The drums soften into heartbeats. People return from the woods, eyes dreamy, cheeks flushed. Some walk hand in hand, others walk alone, but smiling. You sit at the edge of the clearing, sipping the last of your mead, watching the first light wash over the stones. You realise that what you've seen tonight wasn't just a party, it was a reclamation, a reminder that the body is not a prison or a shame, but a tool for magic. That desire isn't dirty, it's divine, and that sometimes the earth asks us to meet her, not with guilt or silence, but with laughter, movement, and open arms. As the villagers gather to bury the ashes of the fire in the fields, blessing the soil for the coming harvest, you whisper your own thanks into the wind, for heat, for bodies, for the brief but blazing beauty of a night where everything was allowed, because everything was sacred. The sun has barely crested over the Aegean Sea when you arrive at the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, but already the whole place buzzes like a beehive. Pilgrims crowd the sacred path, their hands full of offerings, honey cakes, coins, sprigs of laurel, and they climb with reverence toward the temple perched high above the valley. From here, the view is breathtaking. Pine-covered slopes tumbling into mist, birds wheeling silently over jagged cliffs. But you're not here for the scenery. You're here for the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi, the woman whose lips shape the will of a god, and rumour has it, do a bit more than prophecy behind closed temple doors. You're led into the adyton, the innermost sanctum of the temple. It's dim, smoky, and hot. The scent of bay leaves hangs thick in the air, mingled with something sharper, sulphur maybe. You stand at the edge of a pit, peering down into what looks like a chasm in the rock. This is where the sacred vapours rise, the ones said to carry the voice of Apollo himself. And seated above the fissure is the Pythia, clad in white robes, her eyes closed, swaying gently as if listening to music you can't hear. She's not what you expected. Not a withered crone or a mad-eyed seer. She's young, radiant even. And as she breathes in the vapours, something shifts in her. She begins to chant, not in Greek, not in any language you recognise. Her voice is low, guttural, like wind pouring through a stone flute. The priest beside her scribbles frantically, translating her mutterings into divine counsel for the trembling supplicant kneeling nearby. You watch, transfixed, as this woman rides the line between trance and possession, half here, half gone. And then, later, when the temple quiets and the crowd disperses, you hear the whispers. She invites the god fully, someone tells you in a hushed voice. Her ecstasy is not metaphor. Now hold up, are they saying what you think they're saying? That the Pythia doesn't just speak for Apollo, she joins with him in the oldest, most intimate sense. It's a controversial claim, even among the ancients, but there are texts, scattered like breadcrumbs through Greek literature, that hint at more than just visions. One fragment speaks of the oracle opening like a flower at dawn. Another describes her cries mingled with the rhythm of the god's descent. The language is poetic, yes, but it walks that razor-thin edge between metaphor and something physical. It raises an eyebrow for modern scholars too. Some argue these were symbolic descriptions of spiritual ecstasy, like the Christian mystics centuries later, who wrote of divine ravishment and sacred unions with Christ. Others suggest the Pythia may have engaged in ritualized, possibly sexual acts, during or after her trance, particularly in the earlier, wilder days of the oracle's fame. And of course, there's the ever-debated question of the vapours themselves. Were they real? Were they hallucinogenic? Or just symbolic shorthand for entering a dissociative state? Interestingly, a geological survey of Delphi in the early 2000s discovered that 2 fault lines do intersect beneath the temple, potentially releasing ethylene gas, a known intoxicant that could induce euphoria, floating sensations, and altered speech patterns. So maybe the ancients weren't imagining things after all. The Pythia really was breathing in visions. But that still doesn't answer the deeper question. What kind of communion was this exactly? You're led to a smaller, more private chamber beneath the temple, No one says what it's for, but it's obvious this isn't a storage room. The walls are carved with delicate images, Apollo and the Pythia entwined in dance, their limbs looping in mirrored poses. The symbolism is hard to ignore. You notice offerings here are different, less gold and silver, more personal. A lock of hair, a bone ring, a strip of cloth that still holds a faint perfume. Your guide, a priest in a deep blue robe, speaks softly as he lights a small flame. The god does not enter the temple, he says. He enters her. This is not blasphemy. This is blessing. You ask if the ritual is literal or symbolic. He only smiles. The body speaks in symbols, but the gods, he shrugs. They take what form they choose. Here's a fringe detail. Some ancient commentators believed that women chosen to become the Pythia were virgins who, once initiated, became something else entirely. Not wives, not lovers, not mothers, but living vessels. And once their time as oracle ended, they often withdrew from public life completely. Some say they lived in luxury. Others claim they wandered into the mountains, consumed by the divine voice that had once filled them. There's a darker version of the myth too, whispers that the oracle's trances were not always voluntary, that in the oldest days she was chained above the fissure, her body taken not by metaphor but by masked priests or even male initiates acting as stand-ins for Apollo himself. There's no hard evidence for this, just fragments of rumour and literary allusion, but the idea has haunted feminist scholars for decades. Was the Pythia a revered priestess or a sacred victim? You return to the main chamber in time to see another young woman take her place above the fissure. The chanting resumes. She trembles as the vapours rise. Her hands twitch. Her head rolls back, eyes wide. The priest catches her before she falls. The supplicant kneels, crying, overcome by the voice of the god that pours from her like water from a cracked jar. You sit quietly at the edge of the shadows, watching, listening, not sure where the woman ends and the god begins. As night falls over Delphi, the sanctuary glows like a hearth on the mountainside. Pilgrims camp nearby, waiting their turn. Some want answers, some want permission, some want to believe the god will see them, know them, enter them, if only for a breath. And you? You walk down the sacred path in silence, haunted by the image of the Pythia swaying over the abyss, whispering secrets with a voice not entirely her own. Because whether it was sex or trance or something more unnameable, one thing is certain. In this place, to speak with a god, you had to give up something of yourself. Your fear, your body, maybe even your name. By now you're probably a little desensitized. You've seen gods invited into bodies, couples disappear into sacred woods, and a parade of phallic statues taken way more seriously than they had any right to be. But none of it, not a single bit, prepares you for what happens when you stumble into ancient Peru. Specifically, into the land of the Moche, where their most intimate rituals are not written down, not whispered about in shadowed temples, but painted in perfect detail on their pottery. And no, these aren't vague, suggestive symbols or polite metaphors. These pots get right to the point, like frontal, back, everything in between to the point. You're standing in a dusty storage room of an archaeological museum near the coast, surrounded by shelves of ceramic figures. From a distance, they look like any other pre-Columbian artefacts. Reddish clay, rounded forms, some chipped by time. But up close, it hits you. These little sculpted figures aren't weaving baskets or praying. They are doing things that would get pixelated on daytime TV, and they are very specific about it. The Moche culture thrived in northern Peru between 100 and 800 CE, building pyramids, creating complex irrigation systems, and developing a surprisingly candid visual language for, well, everything. Their ceramics depict scenes of agriculture, warfare, myth, and also a rich, varied, and extremely explicit library of sexual acts. We're talking heterosexual, homosexual, oral, anal, even acts involving skeletons. Yes, skeletons. We'll come back to that one. But here's what makes it weirder. These were ritual objects. They weren't jokes. They weren't hidden under beds. They were used in burials, offerings, and probably ceremonial processions, which means that somewhere along the line someone picked up a pot showing two men in a very enthusiastic embrace and thought, ah yes, this will guide Uncle Kalpa into the afterlife. Your guide, a local anthropologist with a casual tone that only makes this weirder, hands you a stirrup spout vessel showing a woman seated calmly while a man, behind her, rather heroically posed, performs an act that defies every polite euphemism you've ever known. This one, she says, was probably about fertility, but not the usual way. A lot of mochi sex pots avoid vaginal intercourse. It's almost like they reserved that for specific rituals, child making only. The rest was up for interpretation. You blink. Avoided. Yup, she nods. More often you see non-reproductive acts. Oral sex, anal sex, even masturbation. Sometimes in group settings. Sometimes with animals, though those might be symbolic. You're not sure if symbolic makes that better, honestly. But this isn't just a culture being graphically open about pleasure. The mochi seem to have understood sex as a metaphor for transformation, power, even death. Some of the most iconic pots show skeletons performing sexual acts which at first glance is deeply unsettling. Why is that corpse getting frisky? But scholars believe it represents the cycle of life and death, a kind of erotic resurrection. To the moche, sex wasn't just creation, it was continuation. There's a particularly famous piece, a pot featuring a man with an erect penis playing a flute, while a skeleton performs oral sex on him. Your guide points it out with the straight face of someone who's explained this to 50 classrooms and one cardinal. See, she says, the music is the offering, the skeleton is the past, and the erection is the continuity of life. Then she pauses. Or, it's just what it looks like. And this is where the scholarly debate kicks in. Some researchers argue that the mochi ceramics were purely educational, or even moralistic, meant to warn about social taboos. Others say they were spiritual in nature, depicting ritual acts that connected people to gods, ancestors, or elemental forces. Still others insist the ceramics are just honest. A documentary snapshot of how people lived, loved, and got weird in the pre-Columbian world. There's even a theory that the pots were political tools, coded messages about who held power, who controlled reproduction, and who could step outside the bounds of social expectation. After all, some of the figures are elaborately dressed nobles or priests, while others are humble farmers. Sex in mochi art crossed all boundaries. It levelled the playing field, or maybe it exposed the field, right there on clay, for eternity. You examine another pot. This one shows a man and a woman in a position that seems logistically impossible until you realise there's a third participant just off to the side, offering a bowl of what might be chicha, a fermented maize drink, and cheering them on. Supportive energy, 1,000 years before the invention of party cups. And yet, despite all the wildness, there's no sense of shame in any of it. No apology. No blurring of lines or clumsy censorship. The figures have calm faces. Their eyes are focused. Their hands are gentle. If there's laughter, it's not mockery. If there's pleasure, it's not hidden. These pots weren't made to titillate. They were made to testify. This is how we lived, they say. This is what mattered. This is how we connected to each other and to the unknown. Outside the museum, the sun dips behind the Andean peaks, casting long golden rays across the red earth. You stand in silence, watching the shadows stretch like the mochi legacy itself. Strange, beautiful, defiant. You think about how much of history is filtered through repression, how often sexuality is either erased or turned into scandal. And yet here, in a desert valley a millennium ago, people were unafraid to mould clay into honest stories, to show the sacred and the carnal in the same breath. And maybe that's what makes the mochi so unsettling, because they force you to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather keep off the shelf. The air here is so thin you can taste it, crisp, almost sharp. You're standing high in the Himalayas, near the edge of a cliff, looking down at a landscape that feels like it belongs in a dream, or maybe just very far from anywhere that would put up a no-touching sign. This is ancient Tibet, before the monks became synonymous with strict vows and quiet meditation. You're at the doorstep of a practice that few outside these peaks have ever witnessed properly, Tantric Buddhism. Not the incense and chanting version sold in wellness retreats, but the esoteric, dangerous, taboo-crushing rituals practiced by adepts who believe that bliss and emptiness could, and should, be reached at the same time. You're led through a narrow stone corridor into a secluded monastery. No golden Buddhas, no colourful banners, just a cold, quiet room, and a monk who watches you with eyes that seem older than time. He doesn't speak, just gestures to sit. Eventually another figure enters, a woman, wrapped in wool robes, her head shaved clean. She is the dakini, not a servant but a spiritual equal. Sometimes translated as sky dancer, a dakini is a female embodiment of wisdom, and yes, a partner in rituals that include physical union. You have, quite literally, walked into a chamber of sacred sex, and you should probably sit down. The room smells of butter lamps and cedar. Between them is a small mandala, sand carefully arranged into geometric patterns. The monk and the dakini sit, cross-legged on either side, their palms pressed together in silent prayer. Then, slowly, they begin. This is not a public show. There's no music, no cheering crowd, no carved idols watching from corners. It's quiet, slow, every movement infused with intention. Their goal isn't physical climax, it's dissolution. They are not trying to lose themselves in each other, they are trying to transcend themselves entirely. In Vajrayana Buddhism, the path to enlightenment includes many tools, mantras, visualizations, breathing techniques, and yes, Kama Mudra, the practice of ritual sex between advanced initiates. The idea is that by engaging the senses, but without attachment to desire, the practitioner can harness pleasure as a vehicle to pierce through illusion. In other words, the act isn't about the body. It's about annihilating the ego through it. That's the theory anyway. The practice? Well, it's intensely controversial, even among Buddhists. Some lineages insist it's symbolic, others argue it's literal, but only for the few who have achieved total mental discipline. Because if you're not fully detached, if you're still craving or clinging or fantasizing, you're not freeing yourself from illusion. You're just dressing it up in saffron robes. Here's your fringe fact. Early Tibetan texts describe ritual sex not as an indulgence but as a terrifying ordeal. The practitioners fasted, meditated for weeks, and recited mantras thousands of times before engaging. The dakini wasn't there to serve the man, she was there to test him. If his focus wavered, if he treated her like a woman and not a living embodiment of prajna, transcendent wisdom, he failed. She might even punish him. And yes, some of these accounts mention physical pain, symbolic death, even mild poisonings meant to sharpen awareness. Love and suffering were never far apart. One particularly unsettling legend involves Padmasambhava, the tantric master who brought Buddhism to Tibet, who is said to have had multiple consorts, including Yeshe Tsogyal, his closest spiritual partner. Their union, described in ancient texts, wasn't gentle. It was explosive, even violent at times, as they ripped through the boundaries of form and mind. She later became a full enlightened being herself, suggesting that the practice wasn't about submission or pleasure, but mutual transformation. You watch the couple in the room now, barely breathing. They move in synchrony, not erotic, but sacred, like a living prayer. The monk's hands form mudras. The dakini murmurs a mantra under her breath. They lock eyes, and something passes between them. Fierce, blinding, peaceful. Then stillness. Complete and total stillness. The room seems to vanish. The mountain seems to vanish. It's just breath and presence, and something more expansive than you have words for. And just like that, it's over. They separate. Bow to each other, rise. No kisses, no flush of romance. Just a deep, quiet satisfaction, as if they've returned from the edge of something enormous and left a part of themselves behind. You're shaken, not by what you saw, but by how pure it felt. But of course, not all stories end this beautifully. The history of these rituals is peppered with scandal, abuse, and corruption. Even in modern times, certain teachers have used tantric sex as a weapon, convincing followers that sleeping with them was a path to enlightenment. Many were harmed, some still are. It's one of the deepest contradictions in spiritual history, a tool meant to destroy ego becoming a mask for power and manipulation. That tension continues to spark heated debate within Buddhist communities to this day. You step outside into the bitter wind, your head spinning. The sky has turned pale with approaching snow. You look back at the monastery, nestled like a secret in the mountain's ribs, and feel like you've glimpsed a sliver of something forbidden. Not because it's evil, but because it's hard. Harder than denial, harder than desire. To stand in pleasure and remain still. To open yourself to union and yet expect nothing. To touch a person and see emptiness. As you descend the path, the snow begins to fall, soft, cold, weightless. You think of the word they used in the temple, tumo, inner fire. It's said to burn at the base of the spine, rising with each breath, each movement, each surrender. It melts the illusion of separateness. And now, walking alone through the quiet snow, you wonder if maybe you felt the edge of it, flickering in your ribs. Maybe. Or maybe you're just freezing. The scent hits you first. Smoke, sweat, and something faintly metallic like blood stirred into clay. You're no longer high in the mountains or drifting through sunlit groves. You're on the wide plains of southern Africa now, standing at the edge of a Zulu initiation camp, where the air is hot and still, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of boys becoming men. It's not a tourist site, not a reenactment. This is real and sacred, and you're here on shaky permission. What you're about to witness isn't the kind of ritual that ends with a certificate or a handshake. It ends with a scar, a new name, and a very complicated introduction to sex. The Zulu people, one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa, have long held elaborate rites of passage for both boys and girls, ceremonies that mark the moment when childhood ends and adult responsibilities begin. But tonight, you're on the male side of the divide where the line between innocence and initiation is drawn with fire. Literally. You're led into a clearing where the young men, barely teenagers, sit in a circle, wearing nothing but loincloths and ochre body paint. Their eyes are wide but determined. They've been fasting, praying, enduring physical tests and learning ancestral laws for days. The elders walk among them with staffs and stern faces, telling stories of warriors and gods, of battles won and shame avoided. And then, just beyond the firelight, the women arrive. They are not wives, nor prostitutes, nor anyone's possession. These are chosen women, makosikazi, selected for their spiritual purity and experience. In some lineages they are older initiates themselves, graduates of the ritual who now return to guide the next generation. Their role tonight is not romantic, it is instructional. They are about to teach the boys how to use their bodies, responsibly, respectfully, and in a way that echoes centuries of tradition. There's no giggling, no flirtation. This is solemn. This is serious. One by one, the boys are taken aside to private enclosures, led by the women. What happens next varies by region, family, and tribal preference. In some places, the ritual is symbolic, a lesson in anatomy, in expectation, in emotional discipline. In others, it involves direct physical experience. Some oral histories speak of a single act of intercourse designed not for pleasure, but for calibration, for introduction, for alignment. It's sex, but not as a celebration. It's sex as ceremony. The tension is thick. Some of the boys return with blank faces, some with tears, others with a strange, quiet pride. No one mocks. No one judges. This isn't a locker room or a frat party. It's more like a funeral for childhood. The boys who return are no longer children. They are amadoda, men. Your guide, an elder wrapped in beads and a leopard skin belt, explains softly, "This is not about lust. It is about knowing. A man who knows his body can protect it. A man who knows a woman's body can honour it. And yet, not everyone agrees. Anthropologists have long debated the ethics of these rituals. Some label them exploitative. Others argue they are misunderstood by outsiders who impose modern Western ideas on a culture that doesn't operate under the same moral structure. The Zulu see sexuality as interwoven with power, ancestry and social stability. To them, withholding sexual knowledge is far more dangerous than offering it through sacred channels. Still, some reforms have happened. In recent decades, many initiation camps have shifted towards symbolic instruction, with greater emphasis on consent and psychological readiness. Elders now debate how to preserve tradition without inflicting trauma. Some communities have banned physical initiation entirely, opting instead for mentorship programs, storytelling, and supervised education. The pendulum swings slowly between reverence and re-evaluation. Your guide offers a quirky detail, half smiling as he adds it. "Did you know," he says, "there is a Zulu saying, umfana uyathwalwa, kodwa indoda iyafathwa. A boy is carried, but a man is held accountable." He lets it hang there, like smoke above the fire. Meanwhile, in a neighbouring village, a parallel ceremony takes place for the girls. Dressed in beaded skirts and adorned with cowrie shells, they gather under moonlight to sing the Umemulo songs. ancient verses about fertility, loyalty, and inner strength. Some of them carry short sticks, symbols of protection. They are not brides-in-waiting. They are warriors in a different sense, being taught how to wield their sexuality as a tool of power, not submission. Among the Zulu, virginity is often emphasized for girls, sometimes tested, sometimes self-declared, sometimes ritualized through dance. And yet, the contradiction looms. While boys are expected to experience, girls are expected to withhold. That imbalance is not lost on critics, both inside and outside the culture. But tonight the focus is on the boys. Later they will be circumcised, not in a hospital, but with ancestral blades, by hands that have done it for generations. It's a physical scar that marks a spiritual passage. They will not cry, or rather, they are allowed to cry, but they will be told their tears are sacred water, not shame. Afterward, they will be given new names, new clothes, and welcomed back into the community with songs and feasts and ululations that stretch long into the dawn. You sit by the fire, watching embers rise into the dark. The drumming softens. The boys sleep under furs, their bodies aching, their minds still catching up to their new status. You realise this isn't about sex as pleasure. It never was. This was about preparation, about the weight of being responsible not just for yourself, but for others, for family, for lineage, for the balance of the world. And yet the question lingers. Can something sacred still be sacred if it hurts? If it forces a child to grow before he's ready? Or does that, in this context, make him ready? You have no answer. Just the scent of fire in your hair and the distant sound of an izimbongi, a praise singer, chanting the names of the newly made men. In this place, manhood is not chosen. It is earned. With blood. With sweat. With the silent understanding that what you do with your body will echo long after your name is forgotten. You don't even need to enter the building. Pompeii tells you what it's about the second you step onto its ancient streets. The city might be long dead, but the walls are still whispering, or rather, shouting. Graffiti clings to every surface, some of it poetic, most of it obscene, all of it startlingly human. A carved penis here, a crude sketch there, an invitation scribbled like a sticky note across a doorway. This city, frozen in time by volcanic ash, did not believe in keeping its sex life private, and now you're standing in front of one of its most infamous buildings, Lupanar, the House of the She-Wolf, a brothel with stone beds, no doors, and a mural menu so vivid you don't need to speak Latin to get the gist. The front hallway is narrow and worn, the floors polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. You walk into a small room, no bigger than a modern bathroom, and your eyes immediately go to the fresco above the door. There's a man and a woman. They're, well, busy. Above them is a number, likely referencing a specific position or service. This isn't abstract art. This is an advertisement. 5 rooms like this line the corridor, each with a crude stone bed built into the wall, covered originally with straw and cloth. The walls are painted in deep reds and earthy browns, and every single one has erotic imagery. Not romantic, not metaphorical. It's straight up instructional. This was an establishment where you could point at what you wanted, and no one would blink. You move slowly through the rooms, reading the graffiti like a bizarre Yelp review system. One etched into the plaster reads, "Meretrix was here. He had the best time with Fortunata." Another, "I did it. And I liked it. A lot." Another is just a name and a tally mark, as if someone was keeping score. One especially ambitious entry reads, "Lucius screws like Mars himself." Confidence clearly was not in short supply. What's most striking is how open it all feels. There's no shame here, no veils. The Lupanar was not hidden in a back alley. It sat near the forum, close to the baths, central and accessible. In Pompeii, sex work was not a secret. It was a service, like bread, wine, or a shave. Brothels were licensed, regulated and taxed. The women, often enslaved, took on pseudonyms like Felicia or Crisis, and carved their own names into the walls. Some even left notes about who they liked, or who smelled bad. And here's your quirky detail. Archaeologists found over 30 phallic symbols scattered around the city, on fountains, doorposts, even kitchen ovens. These weren't jokes. The phallus was a symbol of protection, abundance, and good fortune. One particularly cheerful example is a bakery where the carving of a penis is aimed directly at the ovens, suggesting that even your daily loaf could benefit from a little virility. But let's not get too romantic about it. The reality for the women who worked here was often harsh. Most were enslaved, brought in from Greece, Asia Minor, or Northern Africa. They served dozens of clients a day, had no real autonomy, and lived in the same cramped rooms where they worked. They weren't part of the main household. They didn't get to stroll the streets like Roman matrons. Their names survive mostly because they scratched them into walls, desperate to leave a trace of their existence. Still, scholars continue to debate the tone of Pompeii's sex industry. Some argue that its visibility was a form of normalization, that in making sex work part of public life, Roman society acknowledged it as necessary and legitimate. Others say the prevalence of brothels and graffiti reflects not acceptance, but exploitation, a sign of how deeply embedded patriarchy was in the city's social structure. The evidence is scattered, and the lines between empowerment and objectification blur quickly in the ash. You exit the lupanar and wander through Pompeii's quieter streets. It's hard not to notice how many of the homes, some owned by senators, others by artisans, have their own erotic art. In the Villa of the Mysteries, you see frescoes that blend sexual imagery with religious rites. In the House of the Vetii, two cupids playfully spank each other while preparing garlands. Even in the bathhouses, you find paintings of Venus rising from the sea, not shy, not coy, just calmly radiant. The Romans, it seems, saw sex as a part of life, not apart from it. They might have had moral codes and social taboos, but they didn't draw a thick line between the sacred and the sexual. One flowed into the other. Pleasure could be a prayer, a mural could be a manual, a goddess could be naked and still holy. You pause at a doorway covered in vine motifs. Above it, a carving of Priapus, the god of fertility, stands proudly, weighing his massive phallus on a set of golden scales. It's both ridiculous and strangely majestic, a joke and a blessing. The homeowner likely placed it there to ward off the evil eye, but also maybe to show guests that they were in for a good time. As the sun dips over Mount Vesuvius, casting long shadows over the ruined streets, you sit on a low stone wall and try to picture what this place sounded like before it turned to ash. Laughter, footsteps, the clink of wine cups, soft gasps from behind painted doors, the scratch of styluses carving mischief into plaster, the marketplace of desire, humming like any other form of commerce. You can't help but feel haunted, not just by the tragedy of the eruption, but by how much these people lived out loud. They loved, laughed, bragged, moaned, and scribbled it all down in ink and clay. There's something raw about it. Honest. They weren't asking permission. They were living, unfiltered, and deeply, humanly weird. Maybe that's the real echo of Pompeii. Not the ash, but the unapologetic joy carved into every wall. By now, your passport through the ancient world of sacred sex is dog-eared, wine-stained, and just a little smoky. You've seen pharaohs charm rivers, Spartan soldiers blur the lines of mentorship, and pottery that could make even a Roman blush. But tonight, the moon is full, the air is still, and you've arrived at the heart of the Aztec Empire, where rituals don't whisper, they scream. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, a city of floating gardens, soaring temples, and religious pageantry so elaborate it makes Broadway look underfunded. You're just in time for a festival in honour of the moon goddess Coyolxauhqui. And trust me, her parties don't come with party favours, they come with expectations. The temple plaza is filled with dancers and smoke. Everything smells like burning copal, sweat and marigolds. Flutes wail, drums thunder, and above it all rises the massive stone face of Coyolxauhqui, carved mid-defeat, her limbs splayed, her expression frozen in celestial fury. The myth goes like this. She tried to kill her mother, the earth goddess Kutlaki, for getting pregnant inappropriately, but her newborn brother, Huitzilopochtli, sprung out of the womb fully armed and sliced her into pieces. Family drama, Aztec style. But don't let the grisly origin fool you. Coyolxauhqui remained powerful, fierce. She embodied the moon, feminine energy, and the shifting rhythms of women's bodies. And in her honour, the Aztecs held sacred festivals that included music, fasting, bloodletting, and, for a specific group of priestesses, something more secretive, more taboo. You follow a group of white-robed women as they pass behind the temple, away from the flames and into the cool shadows of a hidden garden. Here, you begin to understand what it means to be chosen. The women are Chihuatlampa, or women of the West. They serve Coyolxauhqui and other lunar goddesses, and they are said to possess her essence, wild, fertile, unpredictable. Most are young, all are virgins, or so the official line goes, but virgin in the Aztec world doesn't always mean what you think it does. Some scholars argue that for these women, virginity wasn't about chastity, but about ritual purity, meaning they hadn't been claimed by a man, but could still engage in sacred acts with gods, spirits, or each other. And here's where it gets interesting. At certain times of the lunar calendar, particularly during eclipses, these priestesses performed ceremonies of union meant to connect the human realm with the celestial one. The rituals were shrouded in secrecy, often conducted in temple caves or isolated enclosures. Some involved dream incubation, others fasting and hallucinogenic herbs, and some involved ritualized sexual acts that were said to simulate the goddess's descent and rebirth. You find yourself in a cave carved deep beneath the temple, a real one, echoing with dripping water and flickering torchlight. The priestesses chant as they anoint themselves with obsidian dust and flower paste. Two of them step forward into the centre of the chamber. They're both adorned with bone jewellery and paint across their bellies, drawn in lunar spirals. They kneel before a stone altar shaped like a crescent moon. Their hands meet, their foreheads touch. And then the dance begins, not with music, but with slow, deliberate motion. It's a form of embodied myth-telling. One becomes Coyolxauhqui, the dismembered goddess. The other becomes the moonlight that gathers her. As their bodies intertwine, it's not about titillation, it's invocation. A sacred union not for reproduction or pleasure, but for alignment. The ritual reminds the community that even what is broken can be restored. You watch in stunned silence as the priestesses complete their dance, collapsing in a tangle of limbs and petals, faces streaked with tears and ash. An elder steps forward and scatters amaranth grains over them, seeds of rebirth. The room falls into stillness. It's not about who they are afterward. It's about what they carried for everyone else. Outside, the party is still raging. Sacrifices are underway, not sexual, but sacrificial in the classic Aztec sense. A captive warrior's chest is opened on a stone slab, his heart lifted toward the sky. The crowd roars, blood slicks the stairs, and you realise the connection between that brutality and what you just witnessed in the cave. Both acts, one violent, one intimate, serve the same purpose: renewal. Energy must be fed, whether with blood or with union. Life, here, is a cycle of giving and taking, with no room for half measures, and that raises the scholarly debate. Were these rituals actual physical events, or were they symbolic performances? Aztec records, written in Nahuatl and later through Spanish translations, hint at both. The Florentine Codex, compiled by a Spanish friar with the help of native scribes, includes veiled references to night dances of priestesses and dream unions in lunar temples. Some modern historians argue these were poetic metaphors. Others believe they were deliberate euphemisms to conceal rituals too sacred or too profane for colonial eyes. Adding another layer of complexity, the Aztec worldview didn't separate sexuality from cosmic function. Fertility rites weren't dirty or private. They were essential infrastructure, the spiritual plumbing of the universe. A priestess's embrace could bring rain. A union performed in a cave might coax the moon back from shadow. Sex was a tool, sometimes violent, sometimes tender, but always holy. You walk out of the cave into moonlight, head spinning. The city glows under the stars, a web of torchlight and shadows. The pyramids rise like sleeping beasts, the streets pulsing with distant drums. You see the world as they did for a moment, not in pieces, but in cycles, not in sin and virtue, but in harmony and imbalance. You think of the women in the cave, their eyes, their stillness, the way they carried an entire myth on their shoulders and delivered it like a prayer. You wonder how many times they've done that, how many nights they've bled for the moon, how many names they've had to give up in order to carry hers, and then, without really meaning to, you whisper a thank you to the sky, not to a god, but to a story that made space for the body and the soul to touch, if only for a breath in the dark. You're back in the land between rivers now, that fertile crescent where civilization first sharpened a reed stylus and wrote its dreams into clay. But tonight, you're not here to read contracts or trade grain. You're here for a wedding, a royal one. Except there's no blushing bride, no champagne toasts, and definitely no awkward speeches from uncles. This is Sumer, thousands of years before the Common Era, and the king is preparing to marry a goddess. And not just metaphorically. There's a bed waiting, perfumed and made. The union must be consummated, or the crops don't grow. No pressure. It's called the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. A rite so ancient that it predates Moses, Plato, and probably your grandparents' understanding of foreplay. You stand at the edge of a temple courtyard in Uruk, surrounded by torches and flower garlands, as priests chant hymns to Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and fertility. She is wild, untamed. The goddess who once descended into the underworld naked and furious and came back twice as powerful. She doesn't settle for metaphors, she demands embodiment. And that's where the king comes in. Tonight, he will become Dumuzi, Inanna's divine consort, her shepherd lover, her willing match in a union that echoes through the very soil. But he's not just acting, he's doing it, really doing it. With a high priestess standing in for the goddess, and witnesses watching, not leering but solemn. You're about to witness a sexual ritual that blurs the boundary between pageantry and sacred act. The joining of flesh intended to ensure cosmic balance. The preparations begin hours before. The king is bathed in scented oils, robed in linen, his eyes outlined in kohl. The priestess, more than a ceremonial figure, has trained for this role her entire life. She wears a crown of lapis lazuli and a necklace of date stones, symbols of fertility and sweetness. Together, they process toward the temple's inner chamber, accompanied by musicians playing lyres and tambourines while children throw petals at their feet. Once inside the sacred space, only a few chosen witnesses remain. Priests, scribes, and elders tasked with recording the event. You're one of them. Congratulations, you're now spiritually complicit. The couple enters the bedchamber, which has been carefully decorated to evoke the lushness of spring. Reeds bundled along the walls, a carved lion's head pouring water into a pool, baskets of figs and honey left as offerings. On the bed, carved into the wood, are lines from the Sumerian sacred marriage hymn. He has sprouted, I have sprouted. He has opened, I have opened. He has come forth, I have received him. This isn't just poetry, it's literal. The priestess, embodying Inanna, lies back, arms outstretched. The king, embodying Dumuzi, climbs onto the bed and joins her. The room grows silent. The act is performed with rhythm, with invocation, with purpose. It's not private, it's not erotic in the modern sense, it's holy. You watch, not in arousal, but in awe, as the ritual unfolds. At its core, this is agricultural magic. The union is meant to mimic the fertility of the land, to call forth abundance from barren soil. By reenacting the divine coupling, the king symbolically ensures that the gods will bless his reign, that grain will fill the granaries, that the Tigris and Euphrates will flood gently and on time. When it's over, there's no cigarette, no awkward shuffle. The priestess rises and sings a blessing over the king. He kneels before her, not as a man before a woman, but as a mortal before a goddess. Then they emerge from the chamber together, faces composed, greeted by cheers and music. The crowd erupts. The marriage is complete. The city rejoices. The world, briefly, feels aligned. Here's the curious bit. The Hieros Gamos wasn't just a one-off spectacle. It was performed annually in many Mesopotamian cities, sometimes in front of enormous crowds. Some versions involved plays, where actors took on the roles. Others required full physical enactment by the ruler and priestess. The Sumerians didn't draw a line between myth and matter. They saw no contradiction in a human playing God, so long as the performance brought real-world results. And of course, modern scholars argue over all of this. Was the sex symbolic? Did the king really do the deed in front of his priests? Or was it a private act wrapped in public drama? Some historians say yes, pointing to surviving hymns, tablets and temple layouts designed with bedchambers and viewing platforms. Others suggest it was metaphor stretched by later interpreters, that maybe the king ritually entered the goddess through poetry and prayer, not actual penetration. Honestly, it could go either way. But even the doubt says something. We want to know what was real. We want to imagine the body of the priestess and the breath of the king. We want to feel that the earth trembled because two people touched. And maybe it did. The ritual has long since vanished, buried beneath centuries of conquest, language shifts, and new religions. But its echoes remain, in marriage ceremonies, in spring festivals, in fertility blessings. Whenever two people stand before an altar and promise union, for better or worse, they're enacting the faint shadow of this ancient rite. You leave the temple slowly, the chant still ringing in your ears. The scent of date wine and sandalwood clings to your clothes. The city hums with celebration. Somewhere in the market, a woman is selling tiny clay figurines of Inanna and Dumuzi, locked in an eternal embrace. And you wonder, was that what the gods wanted all along? Not temples or blood or gold, but just two people, daring to merge under the eyes of heaven, believing even for one night that union could save the world. You're not entirely sure what you're looking at first. There's music, drums, flutes, bells, but it's oddly out of sync, like the rhythm was broken and stitched back together. The crowd around you is buzzing, eyes locked on the temple steps where a group of men are dancing in long swirling robes. Their movements are sharp, ecstatic, almost violent, and then you see it, red streaks staining their garments. Blood. Not from battle or punishment, but from a self-inflicted ritual. You're in Phrygia now, somewhere in what's modern-day Turkey, and you've stumbled into the unblinking heart of the cult of Cybele. This isn't a fertility rite. It's a full-body exorcism, and it ends with the ultimate sacrifice, manhood. Cybele, the Great Mother, was not a goddess you approached lightly. She was wild, unbridled, primal. Often depicted enthroned with lions at her side, she ruled over nature's chaos and raw feminine power. She wasn't here to soothe. She was here to shake you free of your illusions. Her worship was intense, driven by frenzy, music, fasting, and ecstatic devotion. And her most devoted followers, known as the Galli, were male priests who renounced everything, including their gender, for her. You've heard rumours about the Galli before, whispers of them dressed in women's clothing, hair long and faces painted, moving through the cities with tambourines in hand, begging and blessing in equal measure. But nothing prepares you for the moment one of them climbs the temple steps, raises a dagger high, and kneels before the crowd. His chant rises, joins the music, then cuts off in a scream as the blade flashes between his legs. He castrates himself on the temple altar, and the crowd cheers. You're not breathing. No one is. And then the drums pound again, the blood is scooped into a bowl, and the Galli is wrapped in white cloth like a newborn. This isn't a death, it's a rebirth. He has become a bride of Cybele, shedding his masculinity to devote himself entirely to the goddess. You stumble back, stunned, and yet no one else seems horrified. Moved, yes, reverent, but not afraid. For them this act isn't madness, it's the ultimate offering, a way of joining with Cybele so completely that even the body must be rewritten. The Galli believe they are transformed, not just figuratively but physically. The act erases the boundaries between male and female, human and divine. Here's your quirky detail for this trip. The day this ritual takes place is called the Day of Blood, part of a multi-day spring festival called Megalesia, which included music, drama, processions and sacred games. But the Day of Blood, that's the centre. That's where the mystery boils over. Some modern historians believe participants worked themselves into such a frenzy before the act, through dancing, drugs or self-flagellation, that they felt no pain. Others argue that pain was the point. The origins of the cult stretch deep into Anatolian soil, long before the Romans imported it into their cities. Cybele's myths are woven with blood and longing. Her consort, Attis, was a beautiful young man who castrated himself under a pine tree in a fit of madness. Some say because of unfaithfulness, others because of divine possession. He died, bled out beneath the roots, and Cybele, devastated, begged the gods to bring him back. They agreed, but only halfway. He returned in a kind of suspended state, neither dead nor fully alive, eternal, half god, half wound, and the Galli, they reenact that story. They become Attis. Some even take his name, claiming his pain as their passage into another realm. But it wasn't all sacrifice. The Galli lived outside normal Roman society, yes, but they also held immense spiritual power. People came to them for blessings, fertility rituals and oracles. They danced through city streets during festivals, wearing jewellery, perfumes and flowing robes, blurring every line imaginable. For some, they were sacred. For others, terrifying. And for Roman officials, a problem. Because Rome, with its obsession over order and hierarchy, did not appreciate the Galli's chaos. Here were men, citizens sometimes, who rejected manhood, bled openly in public, and served a foreign goddess that couldn't be controlled. So the Senate tried to suppress them. Edicts were passed. Native Romans were forbidden to castrate themselves. But enforcement was spotty. The cult endured. You can't outlaw devotion that deep. Modern scholars are still arguing over how to classify the Galli. Were they transgender? Eunuchs? Priests acting out myth? The language doesn't map cleanly. Some insist they should be seen as early trans figures. Others caution against applying modern identities to ancient practices. But the one thing everyone agrees on, the Galli were radical. They lived on the edge of societal norms, rejected everything the Roman patriarchy held sacred, and found their power in surrender. You find yourself seated near a group of them now, in the temple's inner court. One has painted his eyes in bold coal lines. Another strums a lyre singing a haunting melody that loops around your brain like incense smoke. They don't look like victims. They don't look broken. They look transformed. Their eyes burn with a kind of clarity you can't quite name, and in that moment, you get it. At least a little. This wasn't about mutilation. Not really. It was about control, reclaiming the body, reshaping it into something sacred. In a world where birth defined your role, your power, your worth, the Galli carved a third path. They chose to bleed, and in doing so, they became untouchable. Terrifying, yes, but also divine. As the sun sets behind the temple, the red of the sky matches the red on the steps. Drums echo across the hills. A chant begins slow and deep. The Galli dance again, not in pain, but in rapture. And you realise they didn't lose anything. They gained a goddess. The salt in the air hits you the moment you step off the boat. It clings to your skin, curls in your hair, and sinks deep into your lungs. You're on the Hawaiian Islands now, long before the hotels, the luau's, or the Instagram filters. This is Hawaii in its ancient form, where volcanoes ruled the horizon and the gods were everywhere. In the trees, in the waves, in the eyes of the person watching you from the edge of the heiau. A sacred temple built from dark volcanic stone. You're not here to tan. You're here to witness a royal ritual so intimate, so political, and so deeply tied to sex, it makes monarchy feel a lot less ceremonial. The temple rises, low and broad from the lava rock, its edges worn smooth by centuries of trade winds. This is no cathedral. It's raw, elemental, and you can feel that hum, that ancient vibration of land and lineage, pulling at your ribcage like a tide. It's kapu here, taboo, but that doesn't just mean forbidden, it means charged, consecrated, and tonight, the alii, the high chief, is about to offer himself to the gods in a way that demands both physical endurance and emotional flexibility. You watch from a respectful distance as the alii is led up the temple's central platform by a group of priests in red feathered capes. He's bare-chested, tattooed in spirals and sharp lines, his skin glistening with oil. Beside him walks a woman, not his wife, not his lover, but a chosen wahine kapu, or sacred woman, selected by the priesthood for this night alone. She wears a lei of fragrant male leaves and nothing else. Her body, like his, is marked with tattooed prayers. They don't look at each other. They don't need to. This isn't personal. This is divine logistics. You've arrived for what some call the aikapo, the sacred eating and reproductive ritual, but it's more than that. In Hawaiian cosmology, mana, spiritual energy, flows through certain bloodlines. The alii weren't just rulers. They were living conduits for the divine. Their bodies weren't theirs. They were tools, vessels. To preserve that mana and transfer it to the next generation, their unions had to be carefully orchestrated. Which means sometimes, yes, sex was a public ritual, or at least a very well-attended one. The woman lies back on a woven mat beneath a stone carving of Lono, the god of fertility and agriculture. Around them, priests chant in low melodic waves. The alii kneels beside her, places his hands on her belly and whispers a prayer. Then, slowly and with ceremonial precision, the ritual begins. There is no moaning, no drama, just breathe, rhythm, intention. It's not about seduction, it's about alignment. The moment is not only sacred, it's political. If this woman conceives, her child could become the next ruler, but only if the timing is right, only if the stars align, only if the mana is deemed strong enough. This is why the alii sometimes took sisters as wives, to consolidate that mana. Yes, sibling marriage was practiced among Hawaiian royalty, not out of ignorance or decadence, but because the power of the bloodline was believed to intensify through union. To outsiders, it might sound disturbing. To them, it was divine math. Here's your fringe fact. Hawaiians had entire chants, called mele mai, dedicated to genitals. And they weren't shy. These weren't medical. They were celebratory, poetic, hilarious, deeply affectionate. Genitals were given nicknames described in florid metaphors and praised for their beauty and function. Some mele mai were even composed for newborn alii, praising their future fertility and sexual power before they could crawl. Because in this culture, the ability to reproduce wasn't just biological, it was spiritual currency. You look around and notice the community gathered just outside the heiau walls. They're singing softly, not watching, but supporting. Their voices rise like a net holding the sacred couple in place. There's no embarrassment here, no giggles, no sense that anything obscene is happening. This is the natural order of things. It has always been this way. And yet, not everyone agrees on how widespread or literal these rituals were. Some scholars argue that sexual rites at heiau were rare, symbolic rather than physical, exaggerated by early missionaries or colonial writers eager to paint native practices as savage. Others point to oral histories, chants, and archaeological evidence that suggests sexual union was a central part of certain seasonal and political ceremonies. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere between interpretation and erasure. But what's clear is this. Ancient Hawaiians did not separate sex from holiness. The act of union was a cosmic echo of volcanic birth, of tides swelling and retreating, of plants bursting forth after rain. The body was a temple, yes, but also a tool, a language, and on nights like this it spoke directly to the gods. You watch as the alii and the wahine rise together, still quiet, their faces composed. The priests anoint them with water and oils, touch their foreheads with leaves, chant blessings over the womb. If conception occurs, it will be seen as a sign. If not, another ritual will follow in the next season. But either way, they have fulfilled their role. They have honoured the gods. They have fed the mana. The ceremony ends with a feast. Not for the couple, they must fast for a day, but for the people. Pigs are roasted, poi is served, songs rise like waves. The sacred has touched the earth, and the earth responds in gratitude. You sit on the edge of a lava rock, watching the flames dance under the stars, and you think about how many cultures try to separate sex from power, from spirit, from public life, and how here, on this island surrounded by endless sea, they refused. They made it central, visible, sacred, and maybe that's the lesson, that some acts aren't private or public, they're primal, shared not with crowds or partners, but with the forces that made us. And maybe, if we paid a little more attention, we'd hear our own blood humming those ancient chants, part longing, part duty, part celebration. You awaken in the middle of a walled garden where nothing is blooming, and yet everything feels alive. Stone dragons coil along the edges of tiled roofs. Wind rustles through bamboo groves like whispers between old friends. This is ancient China, quiet, restrained, dignified, and yet beneath the surface something pulses. Not just the hum of civilization, but something warmer, subtler. You've arrived at the private quarters of a Taoist alchemist, and he's about to explain how sex can literally extend your life, awaken your spirit, and, if you're lucky, make you immortal. You're ushered through a wooden door carved with yin-yang symbols and led into a study that smells like sandalwood and dried plum. Shelves are packed with scrolls, thick with diagrams of the human body, stars, animals, and a frankly alarming number of genitalia. Your host is an elder in flowing robes, hair in a topknot, eyes sparkling like he's about to reveal a cosmic joke. He sits cross-legged, offers you tea and begins. The path to immortality, he says, starts between the legs. You almost choke on your tea. Taoism, unlike many other ancient philosophies, never viewed sexual energy as something dirty or distracting. Quite the opposite. They believed it was essential, a vital life force called jing, stored in semen, menstrual blood, and the organs. Misusing it led to weakness, disease, early death. But if harnessed properly, through careful breathing, timing, and technique, it could purify the body, open the mind, and even launch the spirit beyond the mortal coil. This is the art of Fangjong Shu, the arts of the bedchamber. You're handed a scroll with illustrations that would make the Kama Sutra look like a stick figure sketchbook. There are couples twisted into improbable shapes, not out of acrobatic arrogance, but because every position is thought to align specific energy meridians. The goal? Circulate ki, life energy, through both bodies, moving it up the spine, across the crown, and back down again in a seamless loop. One diagram shows a man thrusting in rhythm with the stars. Another depicts a woman exhaling through her toes. It's all very specific, and very sincere. But here's the twist. In some Taoist schools, ejaculation was considered catastrophic. Every drop of semen was thought to drain your life force, so men were trained to delay, withhold, even reabsorb their fluids. One method involved clenching certain muscles so hard you could probably crack walnuts between your thighs. Another technique used breath control to reverse the flow of energy just before climax, shooting it up the spine to nourish the brain. And the women? Oh, they were considered powerful vessels of yin energy, cool, fertile, nurturing, and essential for balance. The more skilled the partner, the more vital energy the man could absorb from her, without giving any of his own. In some texts, a highly trained Taoist master could make love to multiple women in a single night, never climax, and wake up literally glowing with health. Also the marketing claimed. You begin to see why some emperors were really into this. There are entire treatises, like the Sunujing, classic of the Plain Girl, which is supposedly a conversation between the Yellow Emperor and a celestial maiden who teaches him everything from breathing techniques to the ideal rhythm of thrusts. Spoiler, it's not fast and furious. Other texts like the Pillow Book blend erotic advice with medical diagrams and lunar charts, suggesting that sex should align not just with moods, but with seasons, tides, and political affairs. Your host unfurls another scroll, this one marked with moon phases and specific dates for optimal sexual activity. Avoid the 8th day of the 9th month, he warns, unless you enjoy bad dreams and sudden grey hairs. But not all of it was metaphysical. Taoist sex alchemy had practical uses too. Midwives used it to help women manage reproductive health. Herbalists tied certain sexual rhythms to digestion and sleep. Even farmers sometimes adopted the principles, believing that planting seeds after a well-timed union under a full moon would bless their crops. You laugh. He doesn't. He's completely serious. Here's your quirky fact. Some Taoist sects practiced heki, harmonious energy exchange, in which partners would engage in prolonged eye contact, synchronized breathing, and gentle, non-penetrative touching to exchange chi through skin and aura alone. Kind of like spiritual spooning, but with cosmic stakes. These sessions could last for hours, days even. No climax, no speaking, just bodies humming together like tuning forks in a temple. As you sip your tea and try not to look too overwhelmed by the scroll labelled the butterfly method, your host leans closer. You Westerners chase fireworks, he says. We chase embers. And that sums it up, really. Taoist sexual ritual isn't about explosion. It's about stoking the coals, gentle, intentional, sustained. Because in Taoist thought, sex is never separate from longevity, or from health, or even from enlightenment. Of course, this hasn't stopped centuries of confusion and misinterpretation. Some scholars argue that the no ejaculation thing was overhyped by later writers. Others claim the texts were metaphorical, referring not to literal sex but to inner alchemical processes. And then there's the fact that many of the surviving manuals were written by men, for men, often treating female partners as energetic vending machines rather than participants. Still, the legacy of Fangjong Shu is unmistakable. Chinese medicine, martial arts, and even modern wellness philosophies still echo its core belief. The body is sacred, desire is powerful, and sex, when practiced mindfully, can be a portal, not a distraction, from the divine. As night falls, your host walks you back to the garden. The moon is low, bamboo creaks gently in the breeze, You hear the soft trickle of water from a hidden spring, and somewhere nearby 2 birds coo in perfect rhythm. You feel something shift in your chest. Not arousal, not desire, just presence. The way the air kisses your skin, the way your heartbeat slows. You don't need fireworks. Tonight, the embers are enough. The torchlight flickers low against sandstone walls as you descend into yet another underworld. This time, not mythic but entirely real. You're deep beneath the city of Ephesus, and the year is somewhere around the 1st century CE. Above you, the world is busy building the Roman Empire's greatest libraries, temples and bathhouses. But down here, things are quieter, warmer, stranger. You found yourself in one of the more whispered-about spaces of the ancient Mediterranean, a private cult sanctuary of the Anatolian goddess Hecate, and tonight her faithful are preparing a rite so layered in symbolism, secrecy and shadowy eroticism that no single culture can quite claim it. The air is thick with incense and rose oil. You're surrounded by veiled women and silent men, all moving with careful steps around a circular altar carved with 3 faces, Hecate in her triple form, maiden, mother and crone. This goddess isn't gentle, she doesn't soothe, she watches crossroads, rules ghosts, opens doors to other realms, and sometimes doesn't let you back through. The ritual tonight isn't listed in any civic calendar, it's not spoken of in polite forums or carved into marble with a triumphant flourish. It's remembered only in fragments, in obscure texts, marginal notes, whispered references to the binding night or the flickering path. And yes, it involves sex. But it's not celebratory, it's not reproductive, it's boundary breaking. You sit at the edge of the temple chamber carved straight into the rock and listen as a high priestess chants in a language that tastes like Greek but bites like something older. The participants remove their veils, not in shame but in surrender, and anoint one another with dark oils. Then the dance begins, slow, controlled, a weaving of bodies around the central fire, male and female, young and old, paired and unpaired. Every movement is mirrored by someone across the circle, and then comes the binding. The high priestess steps into the centre and unrolls a cord, black, long and thin as a serpent. One by one, couples are tied wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, waist to waist, each knot made with a whispered vow. Not I love you, not even I want you, but I see you. I cross with you. I dissolve with you. This is Hecate's magic. Not pleasure, not pain, but the unravelling of illusion. Sex here is not used to affirm identity, but to obliterate it. You are not your body. You're not your name. You're not your past. Just energy, vibrating in time, moving through another, watched by a goddess who lives at the threshold of everything. As the couples lower themselves onto the fur-covered stone floor, the fire dims. All you hear are gasps, sighs, chants, like music composed of breath alone. The bindings do not limit, they focus, they slow things down, make every shift of muscle intentional. Eyes stay locked, movements mirror. This is not domination or submission. It's not romance. It's not even lust. It's presence. And it's terrifying. Here's your fringe fact. Some of Hecate's followers believed that orgasm, if reached during these sacred rites, could send the soul partially out of the body. Like an astral projection, but stickier. They called it crossing fire, and it was said to leave a mark on the spirit forever. That's why participants often painted black dots on their foreheads afterward. Tiny stars to say, I've gone to the edge and returned. Scholars have long fought over how literal these rituals were. Some argue the binding rites were entirely symbolic, dramatised theatre to represent spiritual union and psychic transformation. Others, citing evidence from early Hellenistic inscriptions and erotic curse tablets, yes, those were a thing, insist the acts were physical, deliberate, and sometimes even legally protected within cult precincts. One recently unearthed fragment from Western Anatolia seems to refer directly to a sacred binding between 2 acolytes, accompanied by instructions for a specific knot pattern and post-ritual cleansing in moonlit water. And about those erotic curse tablets, brace yourself. Ancient love magic often veered into obsessive territory. Some people, desperate to win or control the affections of another, would write out incantations on thin sheets of lead, folded them tight, and bury them in graves, hoping the spirits would carry their wish into the underworld. Many invoked Hecate directly, calling her the night wanderer, the key-bearer, the one who could unlock hearts, or lock them forever. But tonight's ritual feels different. It's not about controlling anyone, it's about surrender, dissolution. The sex you witness is sacred not because it's hidden, or flashy, or primal, but because it's deliberate. Every touch is a question, every breath a spell, and when it ends there is no climax of applause, no release of noise, just silence, the kind that folds over you like a blanket, or a shadow. The high priestess walks through the circle, cutting the cords gently one by one. Each pair lies still, eyes open, bodies trembling with something you don't have a name for. They don't kiss, they don't cuddle, they just are raw, unveiled. For a moment they have forgotten who they are, and that forgetting is the whole point. As dawn threatens the edge of the sky, the veils are put back on. The oil lamps are extinguished. The altar is wiped clean. No one speaks. Not because it's forbidden, but because anything you could say would shrink what just happened into something small. And that would be a kind of violence. You follow the last of the robed figures into the morning haze, and the city reappears slowly. Markets, birdsong, the clink of amphorae. Life resumes. But you're not the same. Not entirely. You keep thinking about that moment in the firelight when everything blurred and you saw, not beauty, not ecstasy, not identity, but space. The kind you could fall into. The kind that looks back. In the cult of Hecate, sex wasn't the destination. It was the crossroad. And you? You just crossed something too. You've seen temples built of gold and bone, ceremonies carved into mountains and lit by fire, but tonight you step into something softer, warmer, woven. You're in the Pacific again, but not Hawaii this time. You've landed in the Trobriand Islands, a chain of emerald specks off the coast of Papua New Guinea, where the air is thick with coconut scent and hibiscus blooms brighter than logic. This place has been called the Islands of Love, though that's less a compliment and more a challenge. Because here, sex is so open, so casual, and so profoundly ritualized that it makes even the most permissive cultures you've seen look shy by comparison. You step onto the crushed coral path that winds through the main village. Children race past you laughing, teenagers lounge under palm-thatched awnings, and somewhere nearby a drumbeat thumps low, like a heartbeat coming from the earth. A girl, maybe 15, walks past you wearing only a grass skirt and a necklace of shells, holding hands with a boy who looks her age. They're not hiding anything. They're not expected to. In fact, tonight is his night to sleep at her hut. You're watching a system unfold that's been misunderstood by outsiders for over a century. When the first anthropologists arrived here, wide-eyed, colonial, and deeply repressed, they found themselves in a world where premarital sex wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. Young Trobrianders began exploring sexual relationships in early adolescence, encouraged to experiment, choose, and repeat. Romantic attachment wasn't shameful. It was expected, but not ownership. There was no jealousy, no lectures about waiting, just curiosity, care, and a whole set of rituals that guided every step of the way. You're invited to the village's evening dance circle. Torches are lit, the drums intensify, and groups of young men and women begin to dance. Hips rolling, hands fluttering like birds, feet shifting in the dust with practiced grace. This isn't about performance. It's flirtation as sacred rite. Eye contact is electric. Smiles are coded, bodies move together in waves, and if a boy catches a girl's eye and she doesn't look away, that's his invitation. No words are spoken. He'll go to her house later. He'll enter her hut silently. If she changes her mind, he'll leave. If she welcomes him, he'll stay. No guilt, no contracts, just rhythm and understanding. You ask your local guide, a woman named Moana with braids down to her waist, how the community feels about all this openness. She shrugs, amused. Why would we be ashamed, she asks. Sex is not a secret. It's a part of life, like eating, like dreaming. And that's not just her opinion, it's structural. In Trobriand society, sexual freedom for youth is balanced by control in marriage. You're free to explore, try, reject, repeat. But when you choose a partner, when you both agree to stay past dawn, it becomes something else entirely. If a boy spends 3 nights in a girl's hut and shares her morning meal, they're considered married. No ceremony, no officiant. just consistency and coconut pancakes. But what keeps this system from spiralling into chaos? Magic. No, really. Love magic is central to Trobriand life. Boys and girls are taught chants and herbal charms by elders, carefully guarded recipes that influence affection, arousal, and even fidelity. Some involve chewing specific leaves and spitting them toward your beloved. Others involve anointing objects with scented oils and hiding them under a sleeping mat. You're watching an invisible system at work, spiritual algorithms fine-tuned by generations. And here's your fringe fact. Trobriand Islanders don't believe in biological paternity. They don't think men cause pregnancy through sex. In their cosmology, a baby's soul is placed in the womb by an ancestral spirit, and the mother's body simply nourishes it into being. The father plays a social role, not a generative one, which means no one obsesses over paternity tests or bloodlines. Parenthood is about presence, not biology. It also means there's no real concept of sexual sin. There are taboos, certain relationships are off limits, but they're based on clan, not morality. You don't shame a teenager for being sexually active. You guide them, you prepare them, you teach them how to love without destroying themselves or others. And yet, not all is paradise. As the island modernised, as Christian missionaries and colonial administrators arrived, the Trobriand sexual ethic came under pressure. Schools taught Western values. Churches preached abstinence. Parents were warned that their children's ways were sinful. Some rituals were driven underground, others faded. And in the modern village you see that tension. Young people holding smartphones in one hand and sacred love charms in the other, torn between algorithms and ancestors. Scholars still argue about how much of the Trobriand tradition survives. Some anthropologists, like Bronisław Malinowski, wrote about it in such exoticized terms that they were accused of either romanticizing or misunderstanding the culture. Others defend it as a system more honest and arguably more functional than many Western ones. And you? You're sitting beneath a moonlit tree, listening to a new couple laugh softly in the distance, and wondering how it would feel to grow up never being told your body was shameful, that your desire needed hiding, that love was something earned by restraint. What if you had been taught that sex was a dance, a language, a way of listening? You imagine your awkward teenage self dropped into this village like a nervous alien, and you smile. You probably wouldn't have survived the first dance. But you also might have learned faster, with less fear, with more care. As the fire dies down, you see a grandmother gently brushing her granddaughter's hair, singing a lullaby about a beautiful girl who once caught the attention of the moon. Not because she was perfect, but because she moved with confidence, because she dared to invite. Here, the body isn't something to conquer, it's something to offer. And love isn't something to fear, it's something you grow into, one shared breath at a time. The light is golden and soft as you step into a colonnaded courtyard in ancient India. You're in the city of Khajuraho, and while the parrots chatter overhead and the air smells like cardamom and cow dung, your eyes are drawn upward, because the temple walls around you are covered, absolutely covered, with carved bodies doing things you probably didn't think were allowed on sacred ground. Men and women, gods and mortals, dancers and warriors, all locked in poses so bold, so complex and so anatomically impressive that you stop walking mid-step. This isn't a freak detail on the edge of a wall. This is the design. This is the message. Welcome to the world of Tantric India, where sex doesn't distract from the divine. It is the divine. These aren't back-alley brothels or hidden rites in caves. These are full-blown temples built by kings, standing proudly in the centre of bustling towns. The Kandariya Mahadeva Temple, the Lakshmana Temple, these are architectural masterpieces, each covered with sculptures that depict not just deities in regal postures, but men and women in threesomes, acrobatics, and positions that would make a yoga master weep. And it's not porn, it's philosophy in stone. You walk the temple's outer path, tracing your fingers over sandstone thighs and curved hips. A woman leans forward, her head tossed back in ecstasy, while a man behind her plays a flute, not a euphemism, an actual flute. Above them, a celestial elephant watches with what might be approval. You're not sure, but what's clear is that the artist wanted this to be seen, not hidden, not whispered, but celebrated. So why is this here? To understand, you need to meet Tantra. Not the modern, Instagrammed, scented oil version, but the ancient spiritual tradition that shook Indian philosophy like a thunderclap. Tantra, emerging between the 5th and 9th centuries CE, wasn't a religion, but a method. A set of practices, texts, rituals, meditations, meant to unlock enlightenment by embracing everything, not denying it. Where orthodox systems might reject the body, the senses, or desire, Tantra said, no, bring it in. The path to the divine isn't above you. It's within you, in your breath, your skin, your pulse. Sex, then, becomes more than pleasure. It's a ritual, a tool, a portal. You're taken to a quieter section of the temple, where an ascetic sits cross-legged under a carved niche, eyes half closed. He's a tantric practitioner, not a celibate monk, but someone who's mastered both restraint and indulgence. He invites you to sit and begins to speak in a low melodic voice. In sex, he says, you disappear. The ego falls, time unravels, you are nowhere and everywhere. That's the goal of Mithuna, the tantric ritual of sexual union. It's not about climax, but absorption. The physical act becomes meditation in motion. Partners exchange energies. Shakti, the feminine creative force, and Shiva, the masculine principle of consciousness. When the two merge, they simulate the original unity of the universe. In the moment of deepest pleasure, if the mind is still, the soul can awaken. That's the theory anyway. Here's your quirky fact. Tantric manuals weren't just erotic guides. They included breath control exercises, visualization techniques, mantra chanting, and even complex hand gestures, mudras, performed during sex to channel energy. Some rituals were conducted in cremation grounds, or after consuming forbidden substances, meat, alcohol, sex, precisely because they broke taboos and forced the practitioner to confront attachment. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about liberation through transgression. Not surprisingly, this got controversial. While Tantra influenced huge swaths of Hinduism and Buddhism, it was also criticised by more orthodox traditions. Some argued the texts were symbolic, that the union described was metaphorical, referring to the merging of breath and thought, not bodies. Others insisted the rituals were real but reserved for only the most spiritually prepared. And yes, like all human systems, some people faked their readiness and abused the rituals. Spiritual manipulation is not a modern invention. But the temples of Khajuraho tell a different story. Their carvings are public, proud and precise. Every detail, the angle of a wrist, the arch of a back, is rendered with devotional attention. It's not erotic for shock value. It's sacred because it's erotic. The pleasure is the proof. If God is everywhere, then God is in the gasp, the shiver, the pause before release. You circle back toward the temple's inner sanctum where, interestingly, no sexual imagery appears. That's by design. The outer walls depict worldly life, passion, music, war, even lovers caught mid-tryst. But the deeper you go, the more abstract and peaceful it becomes, until at the centre stands the deity, calm, still, eternal. The journey inward mimics the journey of the self, through chaos and desire, into silence and clarity. And maybe that's the point. Tantra doesn't deny the outer world. It walks through it, unafraid, until nothing is left but light. As evening falls and the temple glows orange against the sky, you find yourself seated under a Bodhi tree watching young couples whisper and laugh in the shadows. They're not ashamed. The temple has seen it all before. Every moan, every giggle, every breathless kiss. It's already carved into the walls, and not condemned, canonized. You think of how many places you've been on this strange journey, where sex was duty, was power, was sacrifice. But here, in the heart of India, it's something else. Not performance, not sin, just a door. Open if you know how to see it. And maybe, for just a moment, you do. You're standing now in a dry, ochre-hued canyon in what will someday be called Utah. But 1,000 years ago, this was the domain of the ancestral Puebloans, those mysterious cliff dwellers who built entire cities into the sides of mountains and vanished before Europeans ever stepped foot on this land. There's no temple in front of you, no golden statue, no altar made of ivory or incense. But if you look closely, just to your left, where the rock face curves inward, you'll find a panel of petroglyphs so subtle they almost disappear in the sun. Spirals, snakes, handprints, and a figure, clearly female, with exaggerated hips, a curved belly, and what appears to be a coiled line between her legs. This isn't graffiti, this is a map. And you're about to enter one of the most elusive sacred sexual systems on this list, the fertility rites of the American Southwest. There's very little written history to guide you, no grand epics or scroll-bound doctrines, but the rocks remember, and the stories passed down through Pueblo elders, softly, carefully, often only within families, suggest that sex among these ancient people wasn't just biological or personal, it was seasonal, communal, ritualistic. You follow a narrow trail between towering cliffs and end up in a small alcove with soot-stained ceilings, the remains of ancient fires. A woman is waiting for you, your guide, a descendant of the Hopi people, whose ancestors likely participated in or preserved these rites long after the great cliff cities were abandoned. She sits with her legs folded, her hands in her lap, eyes steady as the wind curls around her hair. In the old days, she begins, we didn't separate the rain from the womb. What fed the earth also fed the body. The Pueblo worldview saw everything in cycles. Rain was not just water, it was a lover. Corn was not just food, it was a child, and sexual energy. That was the force that connected all of it. Rites of fertility took place not in temples, but in nature, under stars in kivas, underground ceremonial chambers, or even among the fields during planting season. These acts weren't secretive, but they weren't vulgar either. They were essential, practical, sacred. You learn of the Corn Maiden, a central figure in Pueblo mythology, often portrayed as a young woman whose movements through the world bring life to the land. In some stories, she mates with the Cloud People, a union calling forth the rain. In others, she's pursued by twin warriors who represent thunder and lightning, and her willingness to open to them determines the fate of the harvest. And here's your curious fringe fact. In some surviving Kachina dances, ceremonial performances involving masked spirits, you can still find erotic symbolism hidden in plain sight. Phallic kachinas, fertility dolls, dances that mimic courtship and conception. The suggestiveness is wrapped in layers of abstraction, but once you're shown what to look for, it's hard to unsee. A gesture becomes a metaphor, a rhythm becomes a ritual. According to your guide, during certain solstice celebrations, young men and women were paired off, not permanently, but ritually. These pairings were temporary marriages, meant to bring harmony between the human and the divine. They would spend time together in a ceremonial space, often after fasting, prayer and dance. Whether or not they had sex was up to them, but if they did, it wasn't taboo, it was welcomed. If a child resulted, that child was seen as blessed, a literal gift from the spirits. But with colonial intrusion came suppression. Spanish missionaries were among the first to record these customs, with horror. They described them as pagan orgies, condemning any act that didn't conform to Christian marital norms. Later, American settlers and government agents banned many traditional dances and forcibly converted native children in boarding schools, breaking the oral chain that had passed these traditions down for centuries. Now, much of what survives exists in memory and fragment. Elders who speak softly about rituals never performed anymore. Symbols etched into sandstone misinterpreted by archaeologists. Songs that no longer have words, and yet the spirit of the rituals persists, not in museum cases, but in the breath of the desert wind, in the swirl of dust kicked up during a harvest dance, in the way some people still look to the clouds, not with meteorological concern, but with longing. Scholars continue to debate the exact nature of these sexual rites. Some argue they were purely symbolic, meant to mimic the union of land and sky through dance and art. Others insist that real physical unions occurred, possibly encouraged during specific lunar phases or seasonal milestones. A few even believe certain kiva chambers were reserved for such rituals, designed acoustically and spiritually for intimacy. But definitive answers are elusive. The Puebloans didn't write their myths in ink, they carved them into the land. You step outside the alcove as the sun begins to drop behind the cliffs, casting the petroglyphs in sharp relief. The spiral glows. The woman-shaped figure becomes more visible. You think of all the civilizations you've passed through. Egyptian orgies for Osiris, Roman brothels with mural menus, tantric diagrams etched into temple walls. And yet, somehow, this silent sandstone carving feels just as loud. Here, the sacred wasn't performed. It was lived. Quietly. repeatedly, with reverence and rhythm. And sex wasn't a deviation from spirit, it was part of the same breath. As you make your way back down the canyon path, your guide walks beside you, silent for a while. Then she says, "We still believe in the rain." You nod, unsure whether she's speaking literally or not. Probably both. So now you're here, lying in the soft afterglow of this long, strange journey through the oldest, rawest corners of human ritual. And if your head isn't spinning a little, were you even paying attention? You've tiptoed through firelit temples, crept into kivas, traced fingers over sandstone bodies, and watched as people across time and geography offered up their breath, blood, and bodies to powers they believed were greater than themselves. Sex wasn't a side plot. It was the stage, the spotlight, the whole production. From the sacred marriage beds of Sumer to the moonlit caves of the Aztecs, from the dance circles of the Trobriand Islands to the death-defying frenzy of the galley, you've seen just how much weight the ancients gave to the act of union. And sure, it's easy to sit here with modern eyes and judge, to snort at the idea of moon-synced thrusting or sacred orgasms that open spiritual portals. But deep down, you know better. You know that what these people were really doing, beneath all the incense, chanting and cosmic diagrams, was trying to make sense of what it means to be alive, to feel, to want, to connect, to be fragile and still reach out anyway. They carved their fears and longings into temple walls, sang them into midnight dances, burned them into ritual and story, not to control sex, but to remember it, frame it, honour it, because when they got it right, just for a moment, they believed they touched something eternal. And maybe, as weird and wild and extreme as these rituals were, there's a whisper of them in your own life, in the way a touch lingers, in the way silence deepens between two people who finally understand each other, in the way your own body sometimes surprises you, glitching past logic into something much older, much wilder. So maybe don't dismiss the ancient ones too quickly. Maybe they knew something we've forgotten, that pleasure isn't the opposite of prayer, it is prayer, in a language that doesn't need words. Now it's late. Your phone's probably at 3%, your limbs heavy, your breath slower. Good. Let it settle. You've just walked through 25,000 years of whispered secrets, velvet shadows and divine messiness. Now close your eyes, take one last deep breath, and slip into whatever dream waits just past this moment.